All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. I see people are still joining us slowly, but I'd like to welcome all of you to the first workshop of our 2022 Sustainable Energy Conference Virtual Workshop Series, which is on nuclear energy in Alaska. I'm Gwen Holdmann. I'm the director of the Alaska Center for Energy and Power, and we are the host and sponsor for this workshop series. Just to give you a little background on myself, I got involved with nuclear energy a little bit over a decade ago at the request of the legislature when they asked us to take a look at the possibility at that time of small modular reactor technology as part of Alaska's future energy mix. And I've been involved with it since then. It fits well with my background in engineering, thermal energy, and physics. And ACEP's been continuing to track the technology over time. And at least I personally have been convinced that at the national and international level, micronuclear reactors and small modular reactors can play a pretty important role in decarbonizing our energy supply. And I think for Alaska, it's worth taking a close look at this technology, and that is what a big part of this workshop is intended to accomplish. When I think about it, as much as Alaskans, we pride ourselves in being an energy exporting state. In many ways, we're also energy importers, not just in terms of products and services, but notably in fuel oil and diesel that we use to power and heat much of rural Alaska. And there are economic and environmental issues associated with that, which we don't think about. And so I do think we should be looking at what these alternatives look like and what it could mean for Alaska's future energy mix. So anyhow, I'll be your MC for this event. Thank you for joining us. So this event is going to be a part of 4 virtual workshops that are going to be held monthly. Just like this one is 2 half-day Zoom sessions, which are free of charge, leading up to the Alaska Sustainable Energy Conference, which we hope you'll join us for May 24th through the 26th in person at the Denina Center in Anchorage. These 4 workshops are each topics that we feel warrant a little bit more time and dialogue than just a single session at the Sustainable Energy Conference. And they're also topics that we think there's a lot of evolution in terms of what's happening in the technology. And it may also be that in some cases, Alaskans are less familiar with the technology. And so that's sort of the goal for these workshops. And in this first one, I really appreciate all of the speakers that have joined us today. We have an incredible lineup of presenters and panelists, and they've put in a lot of legwork. We've curated a lot of questions with them that have come from the Alaska Nuclear Energy Working Group. And so I'm really excited about the knowledge that they'll be sharing and the expertise they'll be sharing with us over the next couple of days. And I'd especially like to thank our Alaska moderators as well for putting a lot of work in helping share, basically helping develop this workshop, and especially George Rowe and David Lockard, who've been really in the trenches. George Rowe, you'll hear from a minute. David Lockard is with the Alaska Energy Authority. So thank you all. So we're basically organizing this workshop around 4 sort of key questions that are really we've really extracted from a bit of a draft roadmap that we worked on even a decade ago, looking at what the potential pathways might be for nuclear energy adoption in Alaska. And so, we looked at this as kind of 4 general questions with stage gates that would help define whether this was a technology that might make sense in Alaska. The first being, does the technology exist? And a decade ago, when we first started looking at modular nuclear reactors, at that time, the technology really wasn't a clear path to technology that had a good fit for the Alaskan environment. That's really changed over the last decade. So it's going to be interesting to get a nice update in the first panel on the technology. The second one is the technology safe? If the technology exists, is it safe, especially in the Alaska operating conditions? So we're going to have a panel on that. Next, is it economic? How does it compare to our status quo energy systems in the state and other locations? And then lastly, is it responsible? Is it socially and economically responsible to be deploying this sort of technology? And so those are the 4 basic questions that we've organized this workshop around. And so we're looking forward to our time together today. Please see the agenda up on your screen here for the daily program overview. And as you can see, each panel is going to address one of these 4 questions, and we're going to follow with a Q&A between our attendees and panelists. So please drop, I'll go over housekeeping in a minute, but the Q&A will be kind of reserved for the end of each panel. So I want to just start with a couple of quick polls here. And one is just where our attendees are joining us from. So you can see on your screen right now to participate in the poll, you can open a web browser and go to this pollev.com /TOTTAK216 and then just go ahead and answer that question. We can kind of pop that up. I'm curious to see where folks are joining us from. And you can also join by phone. So we'll just give that a minute. I'd also like to acknowledge just really quickly our fantastic events support staff, government event services. Martha is leading a team of 4 folks there that are providing support for this event, and they've been really fantastic to work with. So thanks for popping that up on the screen. I don't know how many folks have participated in it, but looks like we've got a pretty heavy preponderance of Alaskan participants, which is fantastic. So. And there's somebody that's floating out here in the middle of this Canada here. All right. Anyhow, that just gives us a good idea on where folks are participating from. Most of our speakers for this particular workshop will be from outside of Alaska. We're really interested in hearing perspectives at the national level from the Department of Energy, from our national labs, and industry and community representatives as well. And as I mentioned, our moderators are Alaskans that have been working to sort of curate questions that have come largely from our nuclear energy working group over the past several months. So I think I'll stop there. It looks like we've got decent participation. Looks like we've got some folks from Idaho and Tennessee. So all right, fantastic. So I just want to go ahead and just do a couple of housekeeping things. We'd like to make sure that you do take time right now to go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat. You can kind of see, the names of people, and you can see kind of the distribution of where folks are calling in from today. But go ahead and just drop a line and introduce yourself in the chat so that you kind of have an idea or a sense of who all is participating here. That'd be really fantastic. And if you're having any trouble, as I mentioned, Martha and her team are really available to help. So if you're having trouble in any way, just go ahead and chat to event support for assistance. During the workshop, all attendees are going to be muted, so you can submit questions or comments using the chat feature. There's only that one chat feature. There's not like a separate Q&A feature for this particular platform. So just to be clear about that. And then our moderators are going to also be sort of curating those questions as they come in for the panelists, which will hold to the end of each session. So please drop them in anytime during the presentations. We are going to make a recording of this workshop available at the Alaska Sustainable Energy Workshop website, Alaska Sustainable Energy Conference website at a later date. That's probably going to be about a week out or so, but we are happy to have you live with us here today. And so it's probably about a week out. And so next, I'd like to offer a special message to share from the governor of Alaska, Mike Dunleavy. He's been very, very engaged and involved with both planning this conference and is really personally interested in this topic. He's out of the state, I think, today, but he's not available to join us this morning. So he recorded a message that we can go ahead and play now. Thanks, Martha.
Hi, I'm Governor Mike Dunleavy, and I'm excited to welcome everyone to our first ever Alaska Energy Futures Workshop. I'm truly thrilled to see Alaskans and our friends from around the world coming together to consider the future of energy. The last frontier is home to over 200 isolated microgrids, nearly 70 of which have already begun integrating renewable power sources. Incredibly, about 12% of the planet's renewable microgrid power is produced right here in Alaska. That's why I'm so eager to explore the potential of small nuclear batteries. From remote communities struggling to afford their fuel bills, to coal-powered military bases, to the mines needed to power our renewable future, these batteries have the potential to change lives. This transformation won't happen overnight. While the safety and economics are looking promising, this is going to take all of us working together to bring this dream into reality. That's why my administration has been working with the Alaska Center for Energy and Power to enable communities to safely explore this technology, and I look forward to engaging in a broader discussion with Alaskans later this month. But first, I want to applaud each of you for your dedication to lowering energy costs and building economic resilience in communities that need it most. And I now speak for everyone here in expressing our thanks to Gwen and ACEP for leading this crucial conversation. With that, I wish you all a wonderful workshop, and I look forward to seeing everyone at our first ever Alaska Sustainable Energy Conference this May. Thank you, and have a great discussion.
Fantastic. Thanks to the governor. And next, I'd like to introduce and welcome Curtis Thayer, who's the Executive Director at the Alaska Energy Authority, and he'll share a few remarks. Thanks for joining us today, Curtis.
Event support jumping in. Curtis, you are muted.
Sorry about that. I want to thank everybody for participating in today's workshop to discuss the potential of advanced nuclear reactors in Alaska. AEA has long enjoyed a partnership with ACEP, and we are pleased to support these discussions leading up to the first Alaska Sustainable Energy Conference. A little bit about the Alaska Energy Authority. AEA is the state's energy office and lead agency for statewide energy policy and program development for the governor. Our mission is to reduce the cost of energy in Alaska. There are several ways we go about doing that. We're deeply involved in power generation and transmission on the railboat. We own the largest hydro project on the railboat, and we also own the most amount of transmission lines between Bradley Lake and to Fairbanks. AEA during the past 20 years, AEA has designed and constructed more than 20 powerhouses for rural Alaska. Most of these are diesel powered, although some run primarily on hydros, and others we've integrated with wind and solar. AEA's deep experience in power generation and transmission and distribution heating systems all over Alaska prove valuable in analyzing the potential for advanced reactors to contribute to Alaska's heat and power needs. Since 2007, AEA has been working with its state and national partners to consider the use of small modular nuclear reactors in Alaska. These devices have the potential not just to address Alaska's electrical power needs, but heating needs. Some of these early applications might include remote mine sites and an additional military bases. Though Alaska does not currently have any operating nuclear power plants, AEA has long advocated that the first advanced reactor be located at one of our military bases. So we're pleased to see that Eielson Air Force Base was selected to host the first nuclear microreactor. Energy is a critical asset to ensure mission continuing on a military basis. This will protect and provide the base with clean, reliable, and resilient heat and power to replace its outdated coal-fired power plant. AEA will be watching this project closely, monitoring the progress with the rest of the state. As to the debate about around nuclear power continues, it is recognized that there are benefits to have clean energy in modern lives. It's worth pointing out that nuclear is an option that should not be dismissed out of hand. If Alaska was to have nuclear energy, a frank, open, and well-informed discussion should be part of the continuing efforts. At this time, AEA's regulations specifically preclude involvement in nuclear energy. Alaska statutes on nuclear energy were written when small modular reactors or micro nuclear reactor technologies were not part of the state or national discussion. Changes related to power generation are in the legislature, and AEA will be involved in that movement. In conclusion, the next two renewables, energy efficiency, and other innovative technologies. Nuclear can make a significant contribution to achieving Alaska's sustainable energy goals and enhancing energy security. If Alaska is serious about building a clean energy future, then it is worth discussing the nuclear power option and the benefits it will bring. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Gwen.
Thanks, Curtis. And we appreciate our long partnership with the Alaska Energy Authority on exploring these types of topics. So thank you. The next person I'd like to introduce is George Rowe. He's the director of the Arctic Energy Office at the U.S. Department of Energy. He's somebody that I've had a real pleasure of working with for many years. In fact, George, I think I lured you up to Alaska for your first trip up north. But anyhow, George has been really instrumental in pulling this workshop together. We really appreciate our partnership both with the Alaska Energy Authority and the Department of Energy Arctic Energy Office. So welcome, George.
Thanks very much, Gwen. It is so great to be with everybody today. I am a huge believer in getting together, asking good questions, hearing from experts, and dialoguing back and forth. This series, the ones that will follow it on hydrokinetics and beneficial electrification and hydrogen, will also be teeing up a longer conversation that will be happening in May, the Sustainable Energy Conference that Gwen mentioned, the 24th to 26th, and the day before that, an event that the Department of Energy is coordinating called Arctic X. If you go to energy.gov/ArcticX, you can find some information about these. We just recently had a webinar on energy justice in the Arctic. In April, we'll be sharing one on doing business with the Arctic. And then the actual event, the in-person event at the Dena'ina Center, just like the Sustainable Energy Conference, will focus in on trying to develop partnerships that build on these series of webinars that help people commercialize, apply, deploy technologies that are relevant for their general context. They'll be focusing on long-term, for example, with the nuclear reactor opportunities, and the shorter term. And so there's lots of opportunities for us to be dialoguing back and forth. Building on what Curtis said, there are so many synergies between what Alaskans know about microgrids and working with things in isolated and then integrated application spaces that I think there's a lot of places for Alaska to contribute. What is quite a national dialogue. Many other states are looking at nuclear energy as a possible portion of their portfolio. And I believe that this seminar, the working group that Gwen will be talking about a little bit later, that meets monthly, is another opportunity for us to contribute. There are many people from the Department of Energy on the phone, the web with us today. And I'm hoping that they will be able to hear some of the questions and ideas, et cetera, that come from Alaska's experience base. I'll just close with a super sincere thanks to the panelists, the moderators, folks helping put the logistics of this whole thing together, and just to the participants. This isn't going to be a success if we don't hear from you. And so I got my eye on the chat, taking notes, looking forward to hearing what comes. Back to you, Gwen. Thanks.
Thanks, George. Yeah, I really appreciate that comment. We are really looking for this to be a pretty participatory event. And so with that being said, I'd kind of like to just quickly review the purpose and the goals of this workshop. This is a topic that's generated a lot of interest over the last few months, and I really think it's important for Alaskans to have access to most current, accurate information about these sorts of technologies so that they can make informed decisions about their energy and economic future. That's a big part of this workshop, but it's really designed to dig a little bit more into the specifics and sometimes some of the trickier to answer questions related to reactor technologies that Alaskans have. I mentioned before that we've sort of been curating these questions from a number of different sources, but mostly through the Alaska Nuclear Working Group that ACEP's been hosting over the past 6 months. That working group's been a really great forum to hear from industry and agencies and share information about current happenings that impact Alaska or that could impact Alaska. And so we encourage you, if you're interested in staying engaged, to sign up for that workshop, and there'll be information available for that. I do want to mention that there's 2 current happenings. Curtis mentioned the Alaskan Air Force Base the planned reactor for 2027 with a vendor FOA expected to release by the Air Force in the next couple of months. And that would be one of the first, if not the first, commercial reactors installed in the country if that moves forward on schedule. We're not covering that project during this workshop, but it is the topic of the March working group meeting. So if you're interested, again, stay engaged through the working group. The second thing that's happening is that there's a bill that is scheduled to be released, I think today, by the governor's office that essentially cleans up state statutes a little bit related to nuclear energy. Curtis alluded to this as well, since most of those provisions, as Curtis mentioned, were sort of developed without microreactors in mind. And so that's something that is a topic that is of current interest to the legislature. We're not going to be directly addressing that, but if anyone has specific questions about the implications of that bill, or just general questions about what it might mean for Alaska and our communities, don't hesitate to reach out to the Alaska Center for Energy and Power and me personally, and we would be happy to arrange a presentation or some sort of conversation about that. What I am hoping is that this workshop is going to be sort of an important sort of first step in developing a roadmap for Alaska related to micronuclear reactors, which could sort of follow a similar format to prior roadmaps that have been developed, for example, in Canada. And so the fact that we're able to draw on this huge suite of experts that have donated a lot of time, not just during this event, but before, and I think in the future, to help Alaskans understand what can kind of sometimes seem like a pretty complicated and sometimes scary technology has been just really fantastic. And many of those are represented here today. We're going to continue to draw on your expertise as we work on navigating a path to incorporate nuclear energy as an energy option for Alaska. And so, yeah, mostly I'm really hoping that this workshop is going to address some of the sort of yet unanswered questions and concerns that Alaskans have and establish a process for dialogue and addressing how those concerns could be mitigated through additional testing, information dissemination, or adjustments to the permitting and licensing process. We're not going to have all the answers at the end of this workshop, and we know that. So it's more of I'm interested in figuring out what the plan is for how we can get that additional information that we're looking for. And so I'd like to just, before we start with our first panel, jump into a couple of just fun questions that we came up with for the audience. So again, you can open up that web browser and go to that pollev.com/TOTTAK216. Martha said I had to say it out loud, so I'm doing that. But we don't see the, where do we see the poll question, Martha? Oh, it's the word cloud. Excellent. I think these can be pretty fun to just watch come together. We might go ahead and review this a little bit tomorrow, but it's just kind of fun to see what comes in mind when people think about nuclear. Yeah, what's interesting to me, Martha's texting me, she says, you can start to read some of these out. And obviously the ones that are in the middle are safe and clean, carbon free. I think if two words are not joined, like with a dash or something, they kind of get disassociated from one another. So that's what I'm seeing there. But then around the edges, there's so many different, this is actually one of the most, the biggest word clouds I've seen in a pretty short period of time, where you see a lot of these, like Hiroshima and bombs and things like this that I'm seeing half-life. So I think this is going to be kind of fun to pick apart. So I'll just let this go for like another minute here. Okay. So I guess that's going to bring us, Martha, did we also, I'm just going to go ahead. Wow, we're going to like run out of space on the screen here. This is really, really cool. All right. Did we also have, we'll show that again tomorrow. I think that's going to be fun to kind of pick that apart, Martha. If you can send me the data behind that, that'd be fantastic. Do we also have a poll question before we jump into the first panel? Let's see here. Yes. This is our last poll question, right? So this question is really about, and hopefully it wasn't confusing to folks. It's which country produces the most nuclear energy in terms of total production, not as proportion of its total energy mix. And so as we're sort of seeing the answers come in here, I'll just share that France is the highest when it comes to the total proportion of its overall energy generation. The highest proportion is from nuclear, but the United States is actually the highest in terms of production from nuclear energy. It's about 20% of our total electric power generation in the US, and that's actually more than double the second largest country, which is China. And these are the top 5 internationally. So I thought that was kind of an interesting little fact that would be fun to start with. So with that being said, I think we're just really doing pretty good on time here. And I'd like to introduce the first panel. That's about, does the technology exist? As a reminder, during the session, questions can be submitted through the chat box, and we will address them after the second speaker has finished, because they've worked together to kind of develop a presentation. So some of the questions you might have during the first presentation might be answered during the second one. So I'd really like to ask you to join me in welcoming our first moderator, who is a partner at Strategy North Group, Mike Pulowski. Mike is somebody I have had the pleasure of knowing for many years, working on energy policy at both the state and the national level. And I think, Mike, we actually met working on state energy planning over a decade ago when you were working with the state legislature on that. And I know nuclear was a piece of that puzzle at that time. And so I'm really pleased that you're able to join us today. I know you've got a busy schedule. So thank you for joining us and moderating the first panel.
Thank you, Gwen, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Is my camera working?
Yes.
All right. Well, I think you set the stage really well there, Gwen, with how long Alaskans have been looking at the potential for nuclear to offer alternatives and supplement the energy mix in the state. What's exciting about the question on this panel is asking, does the technology exist? And it's really interesting because what I hope we get from the panel today is a grounding in and understanding of where the technology's evolved. And I can't think of anybody better to introduce that to us than Alice Caponiti, the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Reactor Fleet and Advanced Reactor Deployment from the U.S. Department of Energy, Office of Nuclear Energy. Alice serves in that role. She leads a diverse portfolio of research, development, and demonstration programs focused on the technical and economic sustainability of the existing U.S. fleet of commercial reactors and the development and deployment of innovative advanced reactors, including small modular and micro reactors. Ms. Caponiti is managing a new cost-shared program with industry to demonstrate multiple advanced reactor designs that offer improved safety, functionality, and affordability, leading to expanded market opportunities for clean energy. Her office also sustains the nuclear talent pipeline through competitive university R&D and infrastructure investment programs, something I think we all know is critical as workforce and understanding. Ms. Caponiti serves on the Generation 4 International Forum Policy Group that advises on research and development needed to establish the feasibility and performance capabilities of the next generation nuclear energy systems. So as you can hear from her background and position, we really have the expert here to talk to us this morning. Thank you for being here, Alice. Can you help us with the question, does the technology exist?
So I certainly can, and hi, everybody. First, can I check that you can hear me?
I can, Alice.
Wonderful. Well, I will tell you what I'm seeing on my own screen and that is one of those little spinning wheels. My screen is grayed out, so I'm not able to start my video or share my slides. If somebody else is able to share them for me, I will speak. And when I get my controls back, I'll certainly try to share them myself. Would that be possible for somebody?
Yeah, Alice, this is Christine. I'll share your slides for you.
Excellent. Thank you.
Right.
So those slides are coming up. What I'm going to be covering is why the Department of Energy is committed to ensuring that advanced reactors are ready to meet the needs of our communities as we transition to clean energy and as we strive for improved energy resilience. And I'm also going to be covering the deep investments in advanced nuclear technologies to ensure that we meet the test of, is it real? And so while I'm not able to see the screen, do you have the slides up, Christine?
We've got slide 1 up right now, thanks to Christine, Alice.
Excellent, great. If you could move forward to the slide where we see our Secretary of Energy.
Yes.
Great. So in the United States, nuclear energy is providing about 20% of our electricity and over 50% of our annual clean electricity production. So this is zero carbon emission electricity. And our nuclear plants are operating with 92% availability. And that is the highest capacity factor in the world for nuclear generation and higher than any other generation source. And this is what makes nuclear energy the largest and most reliable source of clean energy, carbon-free electricity on the grid today. So if you could advance. While the current landscape for nuclear energy is our large existing plants that provide reliable baseload power for distributed grids, the future energy landscape is expected to look quite different. And if you could advance, what we'll have in the future, beginning now really, is a combination of our large existing fleet plants together with fossil and renewable sources, providing not only electricity, but also able to provide heat and operate flexibly to produce other products, such as hydrogen, such as helping us decarbonize major sectors of our economy. And this will also provide revenue diversification for our nuclear fleet. So for example, my office is supporting a number of hydrogen production demonstrations at existing fleet plants that are part of a broader effort. So if you could advance. Meeting these needs, we have dozens of US companies that are working on advanced nuclear designs. And these designs are going to provide the wide array of capabilities that we need. And they're being offered in a variety of sizes. And so when we think of plant sizes, I know often people want to think about putting plant sizes defined by energy output, but it's a little bit too narrow. So what I would like to do, instead of just cover how many megawatts electric microreactors produce as compared to small modular reactors.
Did we lose her audio?
Alice, did we lose you?
Just 1 second. Okay, well, event support, could you let us?
Event support jumping in here. We've lost Alice here. It looks like she's having some connectivity problems. If you guys wouldn't mind, possibly Christine, we'll get started with you.
Well, actually, what I'll do is we'll carry on as far as I can go in Alice's presentation, and maybe she'll jump back in here quickly. So going to the next slide, talking about, so as Alice trailed off there into the Ethernet, literally, she was talking about the size of the reactors is just one aspect of how you can describe them. There's really a significant amount of defining features that might be more interesting ways to think about our reactors. So when you think about the reactors of today, what we have here is large scale conventional reactors. These are from the upper 100s to the thousands of megawatt electric range. And they're what we have in the fleet today. They do require substantial on-site preparation and construction and assembly prior to operation on site. So as you'll see in some of the reactors we're talking about in the advanced space, that's where there's a bit of difference. Large scale reactors are primarily for baseload power generation. I think it's fair to say, based on our conversations with Mike last week, however, baseload in Alaska might be a little bit different in terms of what the grid could take. So moving on to small modular reactors, medium-sized reactors, if you want to think of them in that way, they're in the tens to the mid-hundreds megawatt range. And in this case, there's flexibility in terms of siting and operations. And in this case, you start to open up those non-electric applications and the ability to load follow. They are intended to be that's kind of hard to say together, factory fabricated, and then you transport those systems to site and connect them together. So your on-site preparation and your on-site construction is radically different from what you see or have experienced in other historical nuclear projects. This also opens the opportunity for shared control rooms and increased efficiencies and cost savings on the operating side once construction is complete. The nice thing about these types of reactor modules is you can start with one module and incrementally increase as your energy demand changes over time. Microreactors, which I think Alaska has been talking a lot about, range anywhere from 1 megawatt to tens of megawatts. These are highly integrated systems, completely factory fabricated and transportable to site. So it's nearly fully assembled when it arrives, and there's various ways that you can deliver the reactor to site. The other aspect here that's unique is, given the small nature of these reactors, you have the opportunity to really be passively safe in your operating regime and with your fuel designs. This is where the future of looking at semi-autonomous control systems and remote monitoring with minimal on-site presence during operations. These run much longer. Just to give you an idea, so the typical fuel cycle for the large light water reactor that we operate in the United States today is 18 months or 24 months. In the case of a microreactor, you're looking at refueling every 10 years. There are, and we'll talk a little bit later about how developers are looking at both mobile and fixed location designs here. Okay, just checking in, event support. Alice, has she come back? No, okay.
No, we need some broadband work too.
Some broadband work, yeah, okay. So recognizing the importance of advanced reactors in meeting energy security and climate change goals, the Office of Nuclear Energy really has shifted their focus over the last decade to more public-private partnerships to develop these domestic advanced reactor designs. In 2012, DOE established the Small Modular Reactor Licensing Technical Support Program to support the design and licensing of advanced light water reactor SMRs. Since then, the office has been working with NuScale to complete the licensing of their technology and the development of the supply chain necessary to make commercialization a reality. So NuScale submitted its design certification to the NRC in January 2017 with the support of the department, and their safety evaluation report was issued in 2020, and rulemaking is currently in process for this design. Okay, so evolution of the industry partnerships over time. So this is where I'm not as skilled as Alice. I'll do my best job, but Mike, if we need to come back to this during discussion for the points she would make, that might be something to do. So in 2005 to 2011, we had the nuclear power program, and this was really looking at Gen 3 plus. So think advanced light water reactor. So this is where we had Westinghouse with the design of the AP 1000, which is currently being constructed in the Southeast, and General Electric with the ES BWR. In 2012 to 2017, as I was talking about in the last slide, we really moved into that advanced, still light water reactor technology, but looking at the licensing support necessary to look at different ways to construct and design a small modular reactor. A lot of this was research specific to the siting and the licensing aspects. And two companies were involved in that work, NuScale and B&W's M-Power. Since 2017, this has really been where we've kind of switched gears and gone fully into what I would call Gen 4 technologies. And this is to not just move NuScale, continue the work on the SMR and the demonstration of the SMR, but also really to move towards looking at the non-light water reactor designs, either through industry FOA awards or, as you see down here, and have probably heard a significant bit about the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program. And the real gist of the change in the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program is a focus on steel in the ground within the next 7 years of these two designs.
Christine, if I can jump in for just a second.
Sure.
We're still waiting for, it could be a pretty severe technical problem for Alice, which all of us, even after a couple of years, have gotten pretty familiar with. But I wanted to take a second then for the audience and just give some context that in addition to one of the best pinch hitters I've ever seen, your background is pretty impressive. Christine is the director of the Gateway for Accelerated Innovation in Nuclear, GAIN, at Idaho National Laboratory. As the director of GAIN, she facilitates a range of public-private partnerships to help move innovative nuclear energy technologies towards commercialization while ensuring the continued safe, reliable, and economic operation of the existing fleet. In addition to that, she works to ensure that clean energy plans value the opportunity nuclear energy provides to meet decarbonization and sustainability goals. She's regularly invited to introduce advanced nuclear energy to state legislatures, utility commissioners, energy planners, and investors. Just wanted to give people some context that really appreciate you stepping in and taking over from here, Christine, but we're really lucky to have you.
Thank you for that.
We'll keep trying to get Alice, but wanted people to know who was speaking.
Thank you. So what I'm going to do, I think, is I'm going to take a moment here to step from this evolution of industry partnerships. And since we've already got it a little mixed up here, I'm going to switch over to my presentation. And then when Alice comes back, she really does tell a much better story than I do. But if I have to, I'll tell it, Mike, I promise. But we'll switch over to my presentation, which is a focus on the public-private partnership. And I think that's a good segue, not exactly the segue we planned. And maybe Alice will be back by then. All right, so bear with me while I share. Hang on. Evidently, switching is not as quick as I would like it to be. I'll get there in just 1 second. Perfect. So it's really nice to work on multiple screens until you have to do this, and then you don't know where things go. I think I found everything. Are you seeing slides?
We are. It looks great, Christine.
Okay. So as Mike mentioned, I've spent most of my career on the private side of nuclear power. I've worked with the existing fleet for 25 years, and 2 years ago decided that there's a unique and important role for the Department of Energy and the national labs to really bring this new fleet of nuclear energy forward. And I just want to preface my remarks, and I'm guessing that Alice would feel the same way. Neither one of us are here to tell you that nuclear power or nuclear energy is the right answer for Alaska. Well, we certainly want to help to make sure that you have as much information as you need and the resources you need as a state to consider that and how that might fit in. So with that, I'll jump in. So in the 2017 timeframe, to support the developers in their path to commercialization. So what we have here is the bridge across what I would call the valley of death that most new products go through as you're moving from an idea and a concept to commercial products. I run the Gateway for Accelerated Innovation in Nuclear. There's also a program that was initiated in 2019, the Nuclear Reactor Innovation Center, led by Ashley Finan, also homed at Idaho National Labs. And our work every day is to get up and imagine what it's going to take and what the developers need and what other stakeholders need to make advanced nuclear a commercial product. We focus, GAIN has been focused on what I would call early developers, early stage developers. NRIC is built to focus on demonstration. This makes a little bit more sense with the presentation but when we go back to Alice's, to give you an idea of how much is going on, I borrowed a slide from ClearPath. If you look on the left-hand side, you see the company names for a variety of different projects and the approximate timelines associated with starting up. And in the blue boxes there, you'll see the names of those particular projects. Many of these are first-of-a-kind commercial facilities. And then you see on the bottom a series of projects that are really focused on the demonstration side of things. So where are these located? This gives you an idea of where these projects are located across the United States. George, I offer a sincere apology for putting up a map that did not have Alaska on it. We will get that fixed. That's bad form. Okay. But this gives you an idea of where these projects are. The colors are associated with the yellow and the red are the advanced reactor demonstration projects that were initiated in the fall of 2020. There's several classes of those. There were 3 tiers to those projects, 2 large demonstration projects. You see one here in Terrapower is actually executing their project in Wyoming. You'll see that there called Natrium. And then you have XEnergy that's building the XE100 in Washington State. The risk reduction projects are projects that are aimed to solve a particular problem that helps these reactors be ready to demonstrate in the next tranche, the next 5 to 10 years. ARC-20 projects are really more at the conceptual phase, hence the name Advanced Reactor Concepts. And those are expected to be demonstrated after 10 years. I hear Alice is back. I see. Hi, Alice. Are you there? So let's catch her up with what we've done. I think, Mike, I'm going to, with your permission, I'll switch back.
That sounds great, Christine.
Okay, we will switch back to where we were with hi, Alice. You're having a great day, aren't you?
Yeah, I won't do polls in Zoom anymore.
Okay.
So
what we've done is I took over and channeled my best Alice. It's not as good as you. Are you seeing a slide now, Mike?
I am.
Okay.
Yep.
So Alice, this is where I left. And then I jumped over into my presentation a little bit and introduced Gain and Enric and some of the timelines associated with demo projects. And I think if you're ready, we can go to the next slide. Or if there was a particular point you wanted to make here, I will hush and let you do your thing.
I'm sure you finished my sentences and we'll move to the next slide. So what I wanted to cover, what I wanted to cover for our major demonstration projects, first, we're working with NuScale's small modular reactor technology, which is cooled by light water. And this is technology that's very similar to our large existing plants that are also cooled by light water. It uses the same kind of fuel, but as a small modular reactor, it has passive safety features. It's able to operate multiple modules with a single control room. So there's a lot of features that allow it to operate flexibly. So this is a first small modular reactor that is going through NRC licensing, and they submitted a design certification for their design to the NRC in 2017, and NRC came back and issued a final safety evaluation report in August 2022, keeping to their review schedule for that application. So why this is important, even though this small modular reactor is much larger than the kind of technologies that are likely to be ideally suited for Alaska, the fact that these technologies go through licensing are important, because when NRC is addressing what does it mean to have a single control room operating multiple modules, how to approve having the reactors operate without the need for offsite electrical power, having a reduced emergency planning zone. As these features go through licensing, it is paving the way for all the designs coming behind that will leverage similar features. So if you move to the next, am I advancing? Okay, there you go. So this is the first commercial demonstration of the NuScale technology. It's the carbon-free power project. This is being built at the Idaho National Laboratory. So with this project, this will be a 6-module configuration of the NuScale plant. It'll produce just over 450 megawatts electric. It's going to use air cooling, which means that it reduces the need for water at the site by 95% with that cooling feature. The initial site characterization is complete at the site selected at the Idaho National Lab, and the first commercial operation is planned for 2029. So next slide. So under the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program, this is one of our two 50-50 cost share demonstration projects. This is Terrapower's natrium sodium cooled fast reactor design. And they selected a site in Wyoming that's the site of a retiring coal plant. This is really important because it's a perfect example of clean energy transition as we nationally see coal phasing out, which is happening. Coal sites are shutting down. What this allows is for a new advanced technology to come in and take advantage of the existing infrastructure at the site. It's retaining jobs in the community. So this particular plant is about 345 megawatts electric, but it's coupled with a molten salt thermal energy storage system, which allows it to ramp its electricity output significantly. So it can change its output from 100 megawatts of electric up to 500 megawatts of electric over the course of hours to be able to respond to the needs of the grid. So this is a really great example of flexible operations. As part of this project, they're going to be building a fuel fabrication facility for the fuel needed for these types of reactors. And I think this capability is going to be very relevant for other fast reactor designs that are being developed. So next slide. This is our other 50/50 cost share demonstration project. It's XEnergy's XE100 plant. It's going to have 4 modules, XE100 modules. This is a gas-cooled TRISO-fueled facility, and I'll be talking about TRISO fuel a little bit more. This plant will produce very high temperature steam, which has it perfect for being able to generate other products like hydrogen, or helping to provide process heat to decarbonize other related industries that can be sited nearby. And this project will also result in the establishment of a TRISO fuel fabrication facility. So next, the reason that we're able to see these advanced designs come to the market within this decade is because of the fact that we've done this before. The Department of Energy built and operated sodium-cooled fast reactors, high-temperature gas reactors in the past. With those test reactors, we learned about the fuel, we learned about the material, we understand how these types of systems operate. So it allows for companies today to be able to design commercially economic versions of these technologies with enhanced modeling and simulation tools that we have today, improved materials, improved sensors. So the reason that we're able to do this today is because of all of the investments that we've been making over the past decades that are directly relevant to today's industry. Next slide. And TRISO fuel is another example of these investments. The Department of Energy has invested over $400 million over the last couple decades to produce a very high temperature, robust coated particle fuel that can operate at very high temperatures and remain safe and will not melt down if the reactor plant should lose cooling. We have a number of designs that are going to be leveraging this fuel because of its safety pedigree and performance. The fuel allows to really utilize the uranium in it and get a much improved economics for the fuel operations. So of the 7 designs supported under the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program, 4 designs are planning to use this fuel. Next slide. Advanced reactors, many of them will also need high assay, low enriched uranium. And what that means is most of our current fleet uses uranium that's enriched to 5% of the fissile isotope that produces the heat in the reactions. Advanced reactors need that enrichment up to levels closer to 20%. And those enrichment levels are not commercially available today, but the Department of Energy is initiating programs to help ensure that that commercial supply come forward in time to meet the demands of these reactors. And so we've initiated a high assay, low enriched uranium availability program. We have a demonstration program underway to demonstrate the enrichment technologies at an existing DOE-owned site in Ohio. And we're also recovering uranium from other DOE sources to make that high enriched, high assay, low enriched uranium available to meet the near-term needs of developers for their initial testing and some initial core loads. So next slide. And I lastly wanted to cover the work that the Department of Defense is doing as being relevant for the kinds of technologies that are most likely suited for Alaska, and that is in the microreactor area. Department of Defense is exploring both mobile and fixed site microreactors to meet a range of applications. One is a fixed site application where domestic sites would like to have robust, reliable power available to them. And so these would be stationary microreactors. They would be likely commercially owned and operated and licensed by the NRC. And so that part of Department of Defense is looking to have a demonstrating microreactor by the mid to late part of this decade. And Alaskan Air Force Base has been selected as a candidate site for initial demonstration. DoD is also developing mobile reactors for forward operating stations. This is a different project. It's Project Pele, and they're looking to have microreactors demonstrated for this purpose soon, within the middle of this decade. And so these would be reactors that could be brought into a position, operated, and pulled out. So operating quite differently, but the technologies that will be used for this project, I think, are very relevant to what could be commercial versions of those designs. And the NRC will be learning from DOE's own safety authorization as we go through that process. So those are the key things I was going to cover, and I'll turn it back over to our moderator for some questions and conversation.
Thanks, Alice. I think we're actually going to let Christine wrap up first. I appreciate everyone who's been posting questions in the chat. We'll try and pull those together for a bit of a dialogue as we wrap up Christine's presentation.
I feel like a little bit of Christine and a little bit of Alice today. It's a
channeling your best.
Yeah. All right. So jumping back into the role of the national labs and private industry together, I want to show you a little bit about where we've been for the past 5 years from a public-private partnership. If you look at the left-hand side of this table, you'll see the name of different funding opportunities that are available. The top one is run by our program, GAIN. It's called the Nuclear Energy Voucher. I think this is really a unique vehicle. It allows private industry to write a work scope that is executed by national lab expertise. National lab, we can use the facilities at the national labs. What I like about it is the work is executed within 1 year, and it's about $500,000. So it's meant to be very surgical for private industry in terms of what they're doing. More broadly, though, what this does is allow folks that are early in their company development preserve capital. And by using the national lab assets, they can preserve capital and put that towards other things in their company. The cost share on these is 80% DOE and 20% private. And you'll see that in the fourth column there in the middle of the screen. The next funding opportunity, the next two are from the DOE, and they have tiers associated with them. So in the industry funding opportunity ending in 1817, we inside the industry fondly call this the IFOA. It's not like an iPad, though. It's just the IFOA. But it has three levels of support. The cost share is different. The first of a kind projects are longer projects, more substantial investment associated with that. And it's expected to be a 50-50 cost share with private industry. Advanced reactor developers, a shorter and smaller work scope, and then moving into that last tier there around regulatory assistance. The project that Alice talked a lot about, that I've been talking a lot about, that you've probably heard a lot about if you're interested in nuclear energy, is the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program. This really is a shift in thinking. And this is saying within 5 to 7 years, we will demonstrate 2 new advanced reactors. Within 10 to 14 years, we want to enable these 5 other concepts to be ready for demonstration in that 10 to 14 year time frame. I think what's most important, though, is as you look across this slide, the amount of investment is approaching equity on both the federal and the private side of things, which is showing the growing interest in, and I'm hoping a pull on this technology into market. Just to toot our horn a little bit again, we were established in 2016 under our voucher program. We've awarded 65 projects and finished 41 of those projects. And we've been working with 40 different developer companies. I'm going to switch gears here a little bit and do my best to represent the Nuclear Reactor Innovation Center led by Ashley Finan. So as I said in the beginning, NRIC is really focused on the demonstration phase of the deployment of new nuclear. And as such, they work similarly to GAIN as a resource to private industry, enabling the assets that we have within the national labs. So you'll see them developing demonstration test beds and experimental facilities, and also working on items that can help us reduce the risk associated with licensing. As an example, for a timeline to the demonstration of a microreactor, so within the EBR2, which I believe Alice had on one of her slides, was we're refurbishing that dome. So that design was developed in 2021. In 2022, we expect to complete the dome design and award the construction contract, and the refurbishment of the dome would be completed next year. That allows us to be ready to bring in companies and integrate and allow them to demonstrate their capabilities. The primary difference to recognize here is that this is a DOE authorized and DOE licensed. So the timeline for an NRC licensed project would be a little bit different. I'm going to skip through here and put all the pictures up. If you've followed the build that's going on in the Southeast, the Vogel projects, cost and market has to come to mind. And NRIC is got several projects listed here to go after exactly how, as we build new nuclear reactors, we can bring those costs down, and we can also address some of the schedule slip associated with construction. The biggest project here that's kicking off this year is in conjunction with General Electric Hitachi. You'll see a broader team listed there. They're looking to demonstrate 3 specific technologies that will help in the aspect of cost and schedule, looking at how you might use a vertical shaft, the steel bricks concept, and also looking at how instrumentation and digital twins will help from an operations perspective. So this project kicked off just last month, and I think the interesting part, excuse me, the interesting part is the NRC will follow along with the project along the way. So it's I think that's an important part to integrate them in. So hopefully between Alice and myself, we've created an interest in what's going on in the advanced nuclear industry. It can be very difficult, though, to keep up. So we do have a website. This is not everything, but we've tried to curate things across the entire nuclear ecosystem to give you just a quick glimpse of important milestones that are being achieved. And Mike, I'm going to, based on our conversation last week, I'm going to try something out here. This might fall flat, but we're going to go for it. So we've talked a lot, we've thrown a lot of terminology about, and, you know, I've tried to think about how we can draw an analogy for reactors that everybody can relate to. So I think reactors are like shoes. And so when you're going to buy shoes, first thing you're going to think about is, am I buying a shoe for a man or for a woman? And then I'm going to think about what occasion is this? Something where I need work boots to go build something in the field, or do I need some sneakers because I'm out of shape because I've been doing too much of this for 2 years and eating snacks along the way? And, you know, similarly with reactors, you start to think about what kind of neutron energy you want and how does that benefit you? Do you need it for electricity only, or do you want to have something that gives you electricity and heat, and how might that serve your community? Then you really start to get into the features, much like with shoes, for example. Having a teenager, I like to have shoes that are washable and sometimes waterproof. I don't necessarily need fitness tracking, but for some folks that are dedicated to the numbers, maybe having that convenience on your shoes. Similarly, with reactors, you are seeing new features beyond what we have in our existing fleet. Flexible operations, microgrid compatible. Is it islandable? The modular nature, building it in a factory, portable reactors. And then you kind of get into what I would call more of the details, right? So is it a boot? Is it a sandal? Is it a sneaker? You know, similarly, we in reactors, we talk about coolant. You'll hear us talk about heavy water reactors and light water reactors, gas cooled, high temperature reactors, molten salt. So this is just a category of reactor. And also one way to describe it. You can think of our reactor designers, maybe they'll become your favorite brand. Who knows? We'll see. And then size, clearly with shoes, length, width, maybe heel height. I don't know. Depends on what you're trying to achieve with your shoes. But in terms of reactors, you'll hear micro and large and small. It might be described by the megawatts of output, thermal or electric, or you might look at the footprint of the plant itself. None of these are incorrect ways to describe a reactor, but I'm hoping that maybe I gave you a little bit of a fun framework to relate to reactors and think about them.
Christine, thank you for that. I thought you had it killed when you had some FOA humor, because it can't really be a technical conference without a FOA joke. But the comparison to shoes, I think, really does lay out my takeaway from the presentation, which is that in answering the question of our panel, does the technology exist? What you've really shown is that this is an emerging, and there are multiple types of the technology, and the department is working with the private sector to advance and develop those through the processes that are in place. Is that a fair summary of kind of the landscape that we're seeing out there?
I'm going to let Alice go for that one.
Yep. You're on mute, Alice.
Thank you. So I was distracted by reading the chat. So I'm sorry, Mike. Could you repeat the question?
I think the big takeaway that I took from the panel is that the question, does the technology exist, is almost too limiting, because there's really multiple different types of the technology that the department and is in partnership with the private sector, advancing through the various processes and stage gates that you both laid out for us. So building on kind of a history of innovation, there's a wide range of different opportunities out there for different circumstances. So it's a much more, I think, diverse and exciting space than I would have necessarily thought with just the term nuclear.
Yeah, and I would say for these designs, many of them are leveraging common features. So when we think about fuel, and I mentioned TRISO fuel, many designs are choosing TRISO fuel, larger designs and smaller designs. And I saw in the chat that somebody's asking about fuel standardization.
Mm-hmm.
And so while many designs will have tailored aspects to their fuel, there can be a commodity aspect to them, like a TRISO particle. When we manufacture, we have a supply chain for TRISO particles, that fuel form can be packaged in different ways unique to designs, but they're going to leverage common safety features. They're going to be leveraging, common manufacturing capabilities. So I think there's a supply chain to this that many different designs, many different developers are going to be able to leverage supply chain features, whether it's being able to manufacture components with advanced manufacturing technologies. Like when this is moving forward, it's going to benefit multiple designs. And the same thing with the point that I tried to make with our demonstration projects. While these cost shared projects may be larger than the technologies that would ultimately be deployed in Alaska, for example, the work being done to license them is going to be very directly relevant to future licensing efforts that are leveraging common features.
Mm.
And so Mike, I think about it similar to how other technologies roll out to market, right? We're going to have some early adopters who see an immediate fit and say, okay, I don't need to wait for all of those other things to be figured out. I know this is a fit. And they're going to partner with that developer, with that company, whatever it might be, and drive that to completion. The other important part about first movers is our regulation to be able to accommodate advanced nuclear reactors. We have to think about our regulation a bit differently. And that's not easy. Our regulation is very mature in this country, but it's very doable. But everyone that comes behind those first movers on those regulatory fronts benefit from the people that went through those conversations first. So if you like to be on, if you're standing in line outside of the Apple store for the new phone, you might be an early adopter of this kind of technology as well.
Thank you for that. That makes a lot of sense. We're going to turn to some of the questions in the chat and try and make sure we get through some of those. Alice, thank you for already grabbing one. But one of the early questions was, why aren't, in describing these reactors, BTUs of thermal energy co-listed with megawatts electrical power when categorizing?
That's a really good comment. And while I don't think of BTUs, we do often refer to megawatt thermal versus megawatt electric. Mm-hmm. So we do very much think about the thermal energy. And many of the designs, I know somebody was asking about the ability to use process heat. I'll give you one example. There's a lot of universities looking at microreactors to be cited at universities as new research tools. We haven't added a new university research reactor in decades. So this is a perfect opportunity as we have new microreactor designs coming forward, perfectly cited for a university. Universities have physical steam plants. They use their heat for their campus heating modes. So in addition to being a research machine, in addition to be able to produce isotopes, it has a very practical aspect to be able to utilize that heat at the university in lieu of the coal plant that I lived across the street from at one of my universities, as an example. So yes, we should be highlighting the thermal energy output as well.
And I think there was another good question that was building off of that about the use of byproducts. The heat is a byproduct. You talked about that. And they use the term SMR and microreactor. And what I saw in the presentation was a lot of fluidity in the way those were defined. And Christine, you talked about, I think it was Christine, aspects. It might have been you picking up for Alice, but that there's really many other things that define small modular, micro modular. Can you help us with some of those terms as they're used again?
Do you want me to take a first shot? So
yeah, it was me doing your slide, but it was a great slide.
Yeah, and I think sometimes people get distracted by the threshold numbers, and we shouldn't. We really should be thinking about the features offered by those classes. So large existing fleet, highly reliable baseload power for electricity, not very flexible in terms of load following. They weren't built for that. We're being able to do things with them, like we're adding hydrogen production capabilities at our plants to provide other economic products. We're learning how to use our existing fleet differently. But when you start looking at small modular reactors, what they're doing is bringing in the added benefits of passive safety, smaller footprints, being able to manufacture components and transport them to where they need to be built. So vastly reducing the capital cost of construction, time of construction, having reduced staffing, multiple modules operated from a single control room. So those kinds of features, you start getting into the small modular reactor space. Load following.
So to use Butcher Christine's analogy, my size 13 extra tough boot is really still just the same boot that my nephew at a size 5 has. Yep.
Yeah, it's not as easy to reduce the size on a reactor as it might be to reduce the size on a shoe. But I think, the interesting part of thinking, if I was an Alaskan and I was considering this question, I would think about my needs first and kind of the reactor last, right? Given the fact that there will be a variety of reactors available to fit into different portfolios, I think being very clear on the state's needs, which are quite unique, and I appreciate all the time, especially that Mike and George Rowe have spent to bring me up to speed on Alaska. I think tailoring and being concise on your needs and the why behind it, then that can lead you into looking at these different features and help you decide, right? For when we think about a clean energy transition, I'd say in the lower 48, one of the things that we're looking at is the potential for repowering coal plants. Well, that can be driven by a number of things, one of which I'm passionate about is the preservation of that transmission connection. If you've read any articles about siting transmission lines, that's very, very difficult. As we transition to clean energy, we have a lot to build, right? Time is of the essence. So preservation of the infrastructure that we have, I think is an important aspect of projects going forward. But I think the features are an interesting way, and we haven't had that potential in the past to think about our reactors in many different ways. But start with your needs first.
I think that's good guidance and turns to an interesting question in the chat that is, given the market, at least in the near term, is very limited, how many different types of reactors can be deployed in the near term? Thinking through the implications of standardization as key to cost effectiveness. Alice, do you want to sort of take a stab at that to start off?
Yeah. For these designs, they're looking at, most of them are looking at fleet-based models for their economics. So having a fleet-based approach toward component manufacturing, toward maintenance, being able to capitalize on the economics having multiple units operating. And I can tell you that when we were evaluating the designs that we selected for awards, we were looking at what was their strategy for domestic and international deployments to be able to take advantage of that. I think also an important part, and Alice brought this out, we're seeing common design features used, right? So I think that will also help to solidify those pieces of the supply chain. To me, the rate of our deployment is dependent upon not just the design of these reactors, but ensuring our supply chain is ready to go as well. Supply chain also is indicative of what we need for workforce. And when you think about, I'll go back to coal projects. When you think about retiring a coal plant, there's preservation of the physical infrastructure, but there's also that transition of the workers there that are familiar with working. The steam side of a plant is the steam side of a plant, no matter how you boil the water, right? So I think there's an important aspect there as well. And these decisions and how and what drives those decisions are a little bit different than what we've done in the past relative to making energy choices.
Thank you for going back to the components. One of the questions that came out earlier was built off the TRISO fuel slide and the explanation of that. There were a couple questions related to that. And I'd first start with how does TRISO fuel improve fuel economics, and what is the impact on life cycle cost economics?
So that fuel, they're able to use that fuel in a reactor longer. They're able to squeeze more energy out of the uranium while it's in the reactor. So it's a higher fuel utilization that will improve the economics of how those reactors operate.
And what is the sustainability or environmental impacts of creating these fuels?
So all of the fuels, so for example, TRISO fuel is going to be very robust for very long periods of time. So for our used fuel strategy in the United States, we're looking at having storage. So the Department of Energy has initiated a process for consent-based siting. There's a request for information that's out right now. It's primarily looking at how should the department structure a consent-based siting approach for fuel storage so that the department can take custody of the fuel and have that fuel stored at federal sites. Having fuel forms that are robust and safe to store for long periods of time is part of that. And so I gave you the example for TRISO fuel. That's an aspect of that fuel that's being considered for storage.
And I think one of the other interesting opportunities with advanced reactors is, so today we have what's called a once through fuel cycle. So you mine, you use, and you dispose, but there's still fissile material. That's why we in the industry tend to call it spent fuel, not waste. However, we made a decision to have a once through fuel cycle. So it's waste today. But that doesn't mean it has to be waste tomorrow. We know how to recycle that fissile material and turn it into a new fuel for an advanced reactor. So the technology exists and we know how to do it. It's the infrastructure associated with actually closing the fuel cycle that would be necessary. But that's an opportunity for us to extend the sustainability and get more out of that initial product that we mine from the ground.
We just got a question building off of that about how many fuel cycles can be economically supported.
Oh, that's definitely Alice.
Well, I'll give you one example. Our commercial fuel supply today is built around uranium fuels. And so we have an existing uranium commercial ecosystem. We are looking at adding higher enrichment capabilities to get that slightly higher enriched fuel that many advanced designs want and need. But it is all around the same mining enrichment technologies. Now, there are some parts in the world where thorium is abundant, and there are developers looking at a thorium fuel cycle. The Department of Energy is not investing in the thorium fuel cycle because we want to take advantage of the commercial fuel cycle that we have. So you'll see that all of the designs that we're supporting are uranium, and we're looking at common approaches toward having the supply chain to meet the needs of that wide variety of reactors.
We're also asked if you can share a bit more of the end-of-life efforts beyond just consent-based siting or in addition to consent-based siting.
So for today's reactors, once you're done, so we'll start in the reactor. So when you refuel a large light water reactor today, you will replace 1/3 of that fuel with fresh fuel. That 1/3 goes into a spent fuel pool at the plant. These are really, really big swimming pools with special chemistry water. And you will cool those fuel assemblies down typically for about 5 years before you put them in a dry cask storage container. These are large containers that can hold many multiples of assemblies. And then you store that out on a concrete pad. In some cases, those pads are below ground, like at Southern California Edison. And in some cases, it's just a flat concrete pad. And until the DOE completes the work around consent-based siting, that's where they will stay. Okay. But once consent-based siting is completed, the vision would be to consolidate the high-level waste, these storage containers, into one location. That gives you the ability potentially to reopen them and capture that fuel and maybe reprocess it in a recycle later on down the road. Or you can just store them in the state that they're in.
That's helpful. And I think I want to take a step back as we start to get towards wrapping up. And while I won't ask you to comment on a specific Bloomberg article, there have been several posts asking about, concerns that nuclear power will not be adequate to solve the climate emergency because of safety concerns and other issues that are naturally part of the dialogue. And I'd ask you to sort of respond in the context of emerging and some of the newer technologies, maybe down into the features, some of the reasons or your response to those concerns.
I can tell you for all of the developers today, designing in from the beginning considerations of safeguards and security is right at the top. So we have a very well-regulated nuclear industry. The designs that we're developing want to be available to be able to be deployed globally. We would like to see US technologies be the technology of choice as the world continues to seek lower carbon options. And so having safeguards and security factored in the designs from the beginning is what the industry is working toward. So I know the Department of Energy is working closely with NRC for domestic safeguards and security, and also with our NNSA, making sure that we're factoring in appropriately international safeguards considerations for these designs. So I think that's one part. And then what studies have shown is to achieve deep decarbonization in our economy, which is hopefully where we can go, we need to have that firm, reliable component that nuclear energy offers for the economics to work. There have been some studies to show if in order to achieve net zero goals, that the utility sector would have to overbuild to the tune of $8 billion a year. If nuclear is not part of that mix, they would have to overbuild capacity to be able to achieve peak demands. And so nuclear's reliable, firm baseload power is really essential as we continue to achieve lower carbon emissions in our economy. So it can be done safely and securely, and I think it's economically necessary.
Thank you oh, go ahead, Christine.
So Mike, I dropped into the chat. There's a website that the DOE has developed specifically to, I would say, talk about safeguards and securities in plain English. And I think it's a really excellent resource if you have questions around potentially non-proliferation of materials, what the rules are around protection of the facility itself, so in the safeguards and security arena. It's a really excellent resource. There are live people behind it. So if you have a particular question, similar to what we do at GAIN and NRIC, if there's a particular question, ask us, we will go to work on your behalf to find that answer, to connect you to the right resource. The other aspect about the new reactors is it's all in the design. It's all in the physics associated with how these new reactors are designed, where you get that what you'll hear terms like walk away safe, passive safety, inherent safety. That's the benefit that we have in moving to some of these new coolants to capitalize on the basic physics that exists there. And there's a lot more to say about that. And maybe that's something in the future, if, as Alaska considers that we can get into some of those details. It does get a bit nerdy in that space, but we're capitalizing on the physics.
I was going to say thank you for dropping that in the chat. It is absolutely going to be part of a long dialogue as stakeholders in the state start to think about what I think was the right question you asked at the beginning, Christine, is defining what the users, the ratepayers, Alaskans are looking for in energy solutions, and then trying to identify what really fits. And that's following on from the local voices, but reaching out to lean on the technical expertise that's out there to answer the questions they have. And these resources that are available are really valuable, not just for the group on these types of events, but those in the public that are going to start to look into these issues as they come forward. Because as you said, one of the best things about Alaska is we are very different, and something we take pride in, but that can often make operating up here very difficult. Well, I'd say we're coming close to the end, and I just ask if either one of you have additional comments you'd like to wrap up for the panel for us.
Well, I'll let Alice have the last word. That's just normal protocol with your federal manager. You let them have the last word.
Yeah.
I think all states need to keep all their options open as we look at an energy transition. Nuclear is not the only technology that's out there innovating right now. And so I think as you consider what you're doing in your state, I love seeing the other panels that are coming behind us on other technologies. Energy is in a massive transformation over the next 3 decades. We don't know what it's going to look like at the end. So set up frameworks that are flexible to consider different scenarios. Don't pick one plan and try to drive it to completion, I guess would be my advice at this point. Maybe the solution becomes clear to you and you can be an early adopter and drive it to completion and serve as a leader for the rest of the United States and potentially globally. But keep your options open, just like you would try to do for your kids. Sorry, that's more of a teenager comment.
Alice?
Thanks. I would like to add that the bipartisan infrastructure law that was passed did contemplate the relevance of advanced technologies for remote and isolated communities. Sounds an awful lot like Alaska when we talk about isolated off-grid communities. So there is language in that bill that has the Department of Energy looking at how do we initiate stakeholder outreach for looking at advanced nuclear technologies for remote and isolated communities. And we also have a very strong sense of urgency to ensure equity in the work that we do. So I'm looking forward to engaging with you, with the Alaskan stakeholders as we start to look at those issues at how can advanced technologies best be made available to meet the energy needs of these communities.
Thank you, Alice, for flagging that in Alaska, we're also blessed with a small but mighty delegation, all of whom were at the table for the development of that Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, no more than my former boss, Senator Murkowski, in full disclosure to everybody, and our favorite congressman for all Alaska, Don Young. So our team in Washington really looked for, as Christine said, the ability to keep the options open. And just thank you both for your time today and all of the informative comments in your presentations. And with that, I see Gwen with the hook, and I'll take a step to the side.
I really appreciate your time, Alice. I appreciate those last comments and hanging in there with all your technical difficulties. But that question around, initiating sort of that stakeholder outreach is something that we've been having a lot of conversations about in Alaska. I think there's still some real legacy perceptions related to activity that's happened up here that may seem like the book is totally closed on at the national level, but there's really still implications for some of the testing and some of the proposed projects in Alaska. And that's the kind of thing where I think there's some real generational memories. And those are the kinds of things that I really think it's worth working with you and working with Alaskan stakeholders and seeing if we can really make sure that we're changing the paradigm for how the federal government and the state government, to some extent, are engaging with our communities and residents, especially in rural communities. So we would appreciate continuing to collaborate with you and Enric and Christine on all of that. Christine and Mike, awesome job pinch hitting there. You guys are a great team there. So thank you for your time. I know how busy both of you are. It really means a lot that you've taken the time to hang out here with us today. We're going to go into a break right now. It's amazing. We're right on time with everything. 15-minute break. We're going to start pretty sharp at 10:30 Alaska time. So I think that's 2:30 East Coast time with Lou Florence, the CEO and president of Doyen Utilities, with the Is It Safe panel, which is actually, I'm really excited about that. That's my panel I'm most excited about, with Mo Shams and Bruce McDowell. So I hope you guys join us at 10:30 sharp. So thanks and see you soon. All right. Well, welcome back to our workshop on nuclear energy for Alaska. I am excited to welcome Lou Florence, who is the president and CEO of Doyen Utilities, and someone I've really had the pleasure of getting to know over the last couple of years. Lou, I'm not going to go ahead and read your bio, but it's just a real pleasure to have you here today. You've been really engaged on this topic. I know you have a little bit of a background in nuclear energy. I'm hoping you can kind of share that with everybody, but it's been a real pleasure to work with you. And you have a couple of really fantastic panelists whose time I know that we're really lucky to have today. And so with that being said, I'm just going to turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Gwen. As Gwen mentioned, I'm the president and CEO of Doyen Utilities, which is, although you may not have heard of it, the fourth largest utility company by assets in the state of Alaska. We serve over 55,000 soldiers, airmen, civilian military personnel, and their families on 3 military installations throughout Alaska. We provide heat, very important up here, electric power, water and wastewater services. I'm new to Alaska. I've only been here a couple of years, but I do have an extensive background in nuclear power, starting with time, as many people did, in the U.S. Navy, and then over 15 years at one of the largest nuclear installations in the world, the Palo Verde Nuclear Generating Station in Arizona, where I did pretty much everything you can do with an operating nuclear reactor. And so coming to Alaska is very exciting to see that there's real opportunities for participation in what I would call another stage of a nuclear renaissance here in Alaska. But really, if you're in any public discussion like this of nuclear energy, one of the important questions, and usually the first question that comes up, is some form of the basic question: is it safe? Many people view operating reactors as risky, and disposing of spent fuel is creating a threat to the environment. So any successful roadmap, and Gwen mentioned that really what we're trying to achieve is a roadmap towards utilization of nuclear energy in Alaska. Any successful roadmap for developing nuclear energy in Alaska must answer this question of whether this technology is safe. It has to do so credibly, and it has to do so completely. Now, if you ask me, I'll tell you that nuclear reactors are a safe and environmentally friendly form of energy production. But given my background and my position, I'm clearly biased. So we have with us today some real experts to discuss this topic. And without further hesitation, I'll go right into the introduction. So the first panelist is actually the gentleman shown at the bottom of the screen, Mr. Bruce McDowell. And so let me introduce him first. Bruce is a panelist familiar to many of us who have participated in the Alaska Center for Energy and Power's Nuclear Working Group. Bruce is a senior advisor at the Department of Energy's Pacific Northwest National Lab. Bruce has 30 years of experience managing complex and controversial environmental reviews and regulatory projects for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the Department of Energy, other federal agencies. In his current role, Bruce is PNNL's lead supporting the National Reactor Innovation Center's efforts to site advanced reactor prototypes at the Idaho National Laboratory. And we just heard a whole lot about the National Reactor Innovation Center. Bruce has also been the project team lead for NRC's environmental reviews, including at the Tennessee Valley Authority's application for an early site permit for small modular reactors at Clinch River site in Tennessee, and extensive experience from 91 until 2008. Bruce held numerous positions at Lawrence Livermore National Lab, including a program manager supporting NRC environmental reviews for operating reactor license renewals, a project manager for the first biosafety level 3 facility in the Department of Energy complex, and environmental manager for the decontamination and waste treatment facility. So as you can see, Bruce is eminently qualified to take on this topic. So Bruce, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Lou, and thank you so much for the opportunity to present today, Gwen and George. Today, we are in this panel, Is It Safe? And as Lou mentioned, there's a lot of experience that we can bring to the subject. Some of my slides today, I think, are going to be an overlap with the slides that Christine and Alice put together. But, you know, if you think about the history of nuclear energy, the history of the technology development coincides with the history of nuclear power plant safety. So even though there's some overlap, I think that would be okay for that discussion. What I'm trying to do today, what I'd like to accomplish, is to introduce some safety concepts that would be useful in the conversations going forward, and actually in preparation for the May meeting up in Anchorage. But also to set the stage for the next presentation by Mo, that you know, NRC is the regulatory authority for the use of nuclear materials in the United States, and that is where the safety reviews take place. And so that's what I'd like to do today, is set that context for that presentation by Mo that's following mine. So next slide. What I've tried to do today is give some perspectives on nuclear power plant safety. One of them, of course, is from the Health Physics Society. The Health Physics Society has a mission statement that they believe that nuclear power in the United States is safe, reliable, low carbon energy source. The exposures to radiation and or radioactive material associated with nuclear power generation, and that includes the entire nuclear fuel cycle, has been effectively managed. And it's not like there's not a risk. The potential hazard that is associated with nuclear energy's high energy density has always been known, has always been factored into the design. But that risk has been effectively managed so that there's really minimal risk to the workers, to the public, and the environment. These 4 statements I have here are summaries of the Health Physics Society mission position statement. The first one, obviously, is that the nuclear energy is the most heavily regulated commercial enterprise in the United States, I would argue. The NRC has that responsibility of ensuring safe use of nuclear materials in the US. And a couple other points here. If you think about how that takes place, not only do they do their reviews of licensing and operational oversight, but they have inspectors that are at the plant every day of the year. I mean, if you think about 2,000 hours, 2,000 hours is basically 1 man year of time. So 8 hours a day, there's an inspector on the site to make sure that those plants are run safely. There's also, every 2 years, there's an inspection by an independent review team from the Institute of Nuclear Power Operations. And also there's there's been so many studies that conclude that the nuclear power is an exceptionally safe way to produce electricity at a nuclear scale. There's a statement here about at the bottom about the relative numbers of direct fatalities compared to other energy sources, and I have a slide later that goes into a little bit more detail on that. The next slide, please. This is just an overview of the history of nuclear operations, nuclear reactor operations over 60 years. And if you think about 60 years, well, that's about how old I am, but it doesn't seem like that's a long time. But if you think over the entire history of these operations, that there's a cumulative over 18,000 reactor years across 36 countries. And that is a very significant base of operating experience. In that time, with the exception of Chernobyl, there has been no member of the public that's ever died as a result of exposure to radiation due to a commercial nuclear reactor incident. The 3 that everybody I'm sure knows about, 3 Mile Island, there was damage to the reactor, but it was contained and there were no adverse impacts. I think everybody's familiar with Chernobyl. In Fukushima, I don't think this is as commonly known, there was no loss of life due to radioactivity, although over 19,000 people were actually killed by the tsunami. So these events that happen during the course of nuclear reactor operations, these are the types of incidents and types of occurrences that lead to changes into the design and improvements into the design. Next slide, please. This is I think Christine and Alice both touched on this earlier. These nuclear reactors were, built initially at the national laboratories. This shows this nice little apple tree shows the reactors as they were developed at the Argonne National Laboratory. First reactor was built there. You can see some of these branches in this tree, hopefully. There's pressurized water reactor branch, there's a research reactor branch, the boiling water reactor branch, fast breeder reactor branch. These reactors not only improved designs and demonstrated designs, but they also were the efforts to make sure that these designs were safe in their operations. On the right-hand side, there are some other examples of some of these reactor types that even back to the 1940s. Next slide, please. I put 3 slides up here that talk about some 3 of the facilities that have been utilized and built at the national laboratories that have contributed to the designs today that are obviously safe in operations. The EBR-1 in Idaho, that was a liquid metal cooled reactor. It was the first reactor that produced power, produced electricity using atomic energy. What's interesting about that, at least to me, is that this was a liquid metal cooled reactor. So some of these designs that they're talking about today would use liquid metal as a coolant. And, this was something that was done in 1951. It's not a brand new technology. It's been around since the very birth of using nuclear materials for generating electricity. EBR-2 was another sodium cooled fast reactor designed and built by Argonne. And it operated for a number of years before it shut down. The fast flux test facility, FFTF, was a sodium cooled reactor that was built at the Hanford site, which is near where I work. And that operated for about 10 years before it shut down. So these concepts of some of the coolants that are being proposed to use today have been developed over the last 70 years at the national laboratories. One way to think about this evolution in designs is what they call Gen 1, Gen 2, Gen 3, and Gen 4 reactors. Gen 1 were that first prototype reactors like EBR-1. Gen 2 were the reactors that were largely developed and make up the current operating fleet for the most part. Gen 3 reactors are ones that incorporate these so-called passive safety systems, and I have a slide that talks a little bit more about that. It's a term that is used quite a bit, and I think everybody probably has a mental image of what that is, but there are some specific criteria that goes into that. And these Gen 3 designs, they're not just theoretical. The AP1000, the Westinghouse AP1000, is the design that's being constructed for the 2 new units down at the Vogtle plant in Georgia. Now, when we think about Gen 4, that is the next step, and it has to satisfy several requirements. The one that I think is one of the ones that is relevant to siting in Alaska would be this concept of advanced safety, enhanced safety. Alice and Christine both talked about the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program. The national labs are supporting those. PNL, for instance, has worked with both XEnergy and Terrapower. Some of that work includes testing a characterization of materials that will go into those designs, the designs of the system themselves, and also in the TRISO fuel development. Next slide. These are 2 of the designs that Christine and Alice mentioned earlier. This is money. These are 2 designs that DOE is actually putting money up for. So these are not potential designs way out in the future. There's actually investments being made now. The Natrium reactor is the one again that's going to be sited in Wyoming as a first siting location. Now these, as I mentioned, for a Gen 4 reactor, it's not only the design that enhances safety, but it also makes them more affordable to construct and operate. They use module systems that are built in factories and can be delivered to the sites. They use fuels that are more economic, have longer lives. So the whole package satisfies those criteria for Gen 4 reactors. Next slide. So what are passively safe and inherently safe designs? There's a lot of those terms are thrown around, but what we mean by passive nuclear safety, it's a safety feature of a nuclear reactor that does not require operator actions or electronic feedback in order to shut down safely in event of a particular type of emergency. Now, we also hear the term walk away safe. That's what's meant by this. The idea is that if there's a problem, the operator could pick up his coffee cup and leave the building. That power plant, through the physics of the reactor design, would be able to shut down safely without any operator actions or without any secondary electricity supplied to operate active systems. The second concept, inherent nuclear safety systems, that would be one where they use certain materials and the properties to add additional layers of protection over and above these passive safety features. Another aspect of this is size. Just the fact that the cores of these micro units are so small, they have less material that could possibly be released, less heat to dissipate. The size themselves are part of the reason why it's considered that natural convection cooling should be sufficient to maintain the core at a safe temperature, which is a statement from the Union of Concerned Scientists. Now, I was told that something that might be useful in these presentations is a short video. So there was an Idaho National Lab video, passive safety video. Please watch this, and it can demonstrate some of these concepts and explain them in a little bit more detail.
Countries around the world are investing in carbon-free nuclear energy to meet growing demand. Decades of data show nuclear energy is one of the safest forms of power generation. Rare accidents at a few power plants in the past were a factor that led to the development of advanced safety features that have been retrofitted to today's reactors. Tomorrow's reactors take safety even further by using new technologies based on the laws of physics. These technologies eliminate the need for human or computer intervention in the case of an accident. Nuclear engineers think in terms of active safety, passive safety, and inherent safety. Active safety needs power to operate, such as a valve or a pump that brings coolant into the reactor. Most current reactors use active safety. Passive safety systems do not need power or human action to operate. One example of passive safety is a molten salt reactor equipped with a freeze plug. If the reactor temperature rises, the freeze plug melts and drains molten salt into a separate tank, instantly cooling the system. Inherent safety systems use certain materials and their properties to provide additional layers of protection. For example, some new reactor designs use tiny fuel particles encased in layers of carbon and ceramic-based materials that prevent the release of radioactive fission products. These fuels can withstand extreme temperatures without melting down. Following the 3 Mile Island accident, U.S. researchers challenged themselves to make safer, more efficient reactors that took advantage of the laws of physics. Such advanced reactors use fuels and materials that have some of these inherent safety characteristics. If engineered properly, reactors can take advantage of those characteristics. These advantages aren't just theoretical. Researchers and reactor companies have already demonstrated many of these technologies. Passive and inherent safe technologies ensure these reactors will operate safer than ever before.
In the previous presentations, this concept of TRISO fuel was brought up. TRISO fuel stands for tri-structural isotopic fuels. The concept here is that the internal kernel of uranium would be encapsulated by 3 layers of carbon and ceramic-based materials. And this very robust, very strong, very resilient coating will prevent the release of any of these, any of the uranium or the fission products below any temperatures that you would see in a reactor. They're very, very, very resistant to heat and structural deformities. On the right-hand side of the picture here, there's some trisolar particles shown. What's not really shown here is that each one of these is about the size of a poppy seed. So they're very small. You can put a lot of them across the face of a penny, which makes them a little bit difficult to handle. And that's why they put them and build them into these spheres that are called pebbles, about the size of a billiard ball. This is an example of an inherent safety feature. It uses the material, the ceramic coatings, to prevent, to add a layer of protection, defense in depth against a release of a radionuclide in the case of any sort of accident or upset condition at the reactor. Next slide. So I think these topics were touched on earlier also, but what size reactors are really suitable for Alaskan communities? If you think about the remote type communities, obviously you're not going to need a 1,000 megawatt light water reactor. Microreactors are these simple and compact reactors capable of producing 1 to 20 megawatts. That number. People think about definitions of microreactor. There's, as Christine suggested, there's many types of shoes available. There's many types of reactors available, and the specific reactor that might be suited for one of the communities, one of the small utilities like Doyon and in Alaska, may be different size, and they're small, but it should be thought of as what is the best match for that use, that location, that load, that need. And some of these, of course, they produce more than just electricity. So which are the reactor types that would produce the combination of outputs that would be most useful for the community? Next slide, please. A lot of the work that's been done for siting reactors has been focused on the continental United States, and so there's some unique challenges in Alaska that, as the NRC in particular looks at licensing, they're going to have to adapt some of the approaches that they've used in the past. So I'll talk about the one on the right first. The NRC has a program that a program within their Office of Research that manages the computer codes that are used to determine if there was a release from the plant, where it would go, who would be exposed, what would be the potential dose to those receptors. This graphic shows some of those codes. There's for instance, there's the RAD-TRAD code that looks at dose from fuel transport. There's the GALE code that looks at potential dose from effluents from the plant. These codes were developed for large light water reactors, and they were developed primarily using studies that were done in places like Nebraska. It's very flat, it's very windy, it's very hot a lot of the times. Alaska is very different. You're going to have situations where you perhaps could have an inversion layer and it'd be very cold and very still for days and weeks at a time. How do you model that kind of situation if there was an accident, if there was a release? There's an active effort to look at these codes and to see how they need to be modified to do those types of assessments in Alaska. On the left-hand side is a picture of a situation that's not relevant in the continental US. You have permafrost. And how do you site a reactor in a place where there is permafrost, where you need to actually understand how the foundation of a plant would be built and maintained, and also how that may change over time? That's something that is, of course, when we think about potential for climate change, that has to be considered. If there's going to be a plant that is in place for 30, 40 years, how is that permafrost going to change over time? And how does that factor into how you design the plant? Next slide. And I guess I would leave with this. Every community has to make their own decisions about what the risk they're willing to take for the benefit that a energy source provides. This is a decision that is unique to that community and needs to be considered in their context. If you think about, what are some of the risks? Coal has the highest fatalities per terawatt year at 120. So if you stay with coal, that has a cost, a human cost. The other, some of the other potential fatalities that are shown here, nuclear, as I mentioned at the very start, with the exception of Chernobyl, there's never been a death related to a nuclear power plant operation, commercial nuclear power plant operation. So these are the types of risks and benefits that each community has to, they have to make their own decision about how they would, whether or not nuclear is a good option for them. And not only today, but looking 30 years in the future, what do they see as being the best option for them for an energy source in the long term? And with that, I'd like to turn it back over to Lou.
Very good. Thank you very much, Bruce. I know that Bruce's presentation has generated a question. What we'll do is, just like on the previous panel, we'll get into the Q&A following the next presentation. So let me go ahead and introduce our second panelist. We are very fortunate to have him available today. Our second panelist, Dr. Mohammed Shams, is the director of the Division of Advanced Reactors and Non-Power Production and Utilization Facilities at the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission. He's responsible for design and licensing reviews of advanced reactors. He's also responsible for licensing and oversight of the nation's research reactors, testing facilities, and medical isotope production facilities. Dr. Shams' distinguished career spans over 25 years in research, commercial, and federal nuclear regulation. He joined the NRC in 2007 as a civil engineer and has subsequently been promoted to the Senior Executive Service as Deputy Director, Division of Operating Reactor Licensing, and then to his current position. In his current role, Dr. Shams is at the center of many of the key discussions about development and deployment of microreactors, which are of great interest to us here in Alaska. Dr. Shams, Mo, welcome, and please.
Lou, incredibly fortunate to be here. Thank you for the introduction. It's humbling to be part of this discussion and to be here to share some perspectives on what we do in the agency and just have a dialogue with you all on nuclear in general, advanced reactor, and as well as microreactors in particular. So we're seeing a significant amount, as many of you already discussed and shared earlier today, significant amount of energy in the area of advanced reactors, no pun intended. And we're also doing a lot on this side of it, which is the regulatory side of it. And I thought today would be a great opportunity to share a bit of that with you and kind of hear your questions and see if anything that I can do to address some of those questions or concerns. Next slide, please. I think Bruce did a fabulous job explaining what we do and our role, but I'll just touch highly on our agency. So we're an independent agency created by Congress in 1975. The agency is headed by 5 commissioners. They're nominated by the president and confirmed by the Senate. And as was articulated earlier, we regulate the nation's civilian, commercial, industrial, academic, and medical uses of nuclear materials. So as Lou indicated, within my area, there are medical isotopes, research reactors, and the like. When we say regulate, it should hopefully indicate to you that we are involved in the entire life cycle of a nuclear application, civilian application that is. from the licensing, from pre-application through operations, event responses, as all the way through a safe decommissioning of this technology. Our job is to make sure that this technology is being used safely in the United States. Next slide, please. For a number of years now, the agency has been working and looking for ways to improve, looking at lessons learned, looking at our approaches, and we are laser focused on continuing to be and improving our ability to be a risk-informed regulators. We see that as a bridge to the future. We see that as an opportunity to benefit our community, benefit the public from this nuclear technology. And in that regard, we've embodied in our office, my office is in the nuclear reactor regulation. We regulate the essentially nuclear reactors. We have other offices that regulate security and materials and the like. In our office, the nuclear reactor regulation, we've embodied a vision of making safe use of nuclear technology possible. This is an enabling statement. This is one that we've articulated to help guide our activities, our initiatives. One of making sure that the technology is possible. It's an option for communities to decide if it's an appropriate option for them. And we just, our effort is to make sure that it's done safely. We try to guide our executives, managers, staff, all the way through that where we can ensure that the technology is done safely and we can do that efficiently, effectively, we should be focused in that regard. Next slide, please. To execute the vision that I just articulated, and particularly in the area of advanced reactors, we knew for some time that these technologies are different. They have different benefits, different challenges. And in that regard, we knew that we needed to get ready for the regulation of these technologies. So what I have on a slide here for you is articulation of a number of strategies that we've developed, number of action plans that we've started a few years ago. And as you can see, they span a spectrum of areas, creating or developing the knowledge, skills, and capabilities we need to review these designs, developing flexible processes to review them more effectively, efficiently, and in a way that returns benefit to all involved. Looking at our computer codes and our reviews, Bruce looked at, just mentioned one of those. We're looking broadly to all of our computer codes, looking for where physics models needs to be updated and the like. Policy issues, there are a lot of the policy issues that we have in our regulatory framework were developed for different technologies, for light water reactor technologies. And we had to look at those and update them. Developing codes and standards. This is codes and standards are the backbone of engineering in these reactors. So we knew that there will be different materials. We knew that there will be different construction techniques, if you would. And in that regard, we also embarked on efforts, with the appropriate groups to update the codes and standards. And lastly, but not least, is our communications, our ability to interact domestically with our federal partners and internationally on what we do, such that it is apparent to everyone where we go and what we're doing, so we understand the priorities, so we address the priorities of our stakeholders. So we're taking on a very concerted effort in the communication. And I should say that in all these activities, we are making significant progress, getting ready, and we are already in the midst of advanced reactor reviews and leveraging all these activities as we do so. Next slide, please. Coupled with our transformation activities that I just indicated, there's a very strong congressional interest and drive in the advanced reactor areas, in the nuclear area in general, and specifically in advanced reactors. 2-3 years ago, the Congress passed the law, the Nuclear Innovation and Modernization Act. And in that act, there were a number of specific directions and mandates for the NRC. One of very important to us is the development of a risk-informed regulatory framework to regulate these advanced nuclear technologies. And we've embraced that mandate. We are working our way to developing that regulatory framework. We have risk-informed the current regulatory framework, and we're implementing or developing, I should say, a new one as well. And I'll talk about that in a second here. Next slide, please. Coupled with the congressional interest, there's also a significant commercial interest in nuclear, advanced nuclear technology, I should say. On the slide here, we try to provide some statistics, some scope of what we're seeing in terms of the technologies. You'll see here a variety of the technologies that we're seeing, and they're interacting. That vendors are interacting with us. The numbers that you have here represent a significant level of activities. We're looking at more than 13 or so applications within the next 5 years, and we're anticipating that we could potentially issue over more than 6 operating licenses again over the next 5 years, including the advanced reactor demonstration programs, as was indicated a little earlier. In addition to what we're seeing in terms of applications, we are interacting with a number of vendors and pre-application. That's an activity that we started more of recently to be able to resolve issues early. And you'll see here some of the statistics that reflect on the type of vehicles, if you would, that they're interacting with us, through white papers, topical report. These are just regulatory vehicles, if you would, to be able to exchange information, provide feedback, give them some clarity on certain issues. So the overarching point is significant amount of activities on the commercial side for advanced reactors. Next slide, please. I mentioned we were taking a lot of efforts transforming our regulatory framework. I'll put a finer point on it here on the slide here, just listing a few of the transformational activities that were taken on in the area of advanced reactors. I mentioned a regulatory framework that Congress had mandated us to develop by 2027. That's actually what we call Part 53, and it's a risk-informed technology inclusive regulatory framework. We needed to develop that because much of our regulatory framework was developed for a specific technology. Not that it's not adaptable to the newer technologies, but we thought there is efficiency and effectiveness in developing a framework that is more risk-informed and certainly suited for broader technologies. In addition to the licensing framework, we're also developing scalable frameworks for physical securities, emergency preparedness. The intent here is to be more consequence-oriented, have scalable frameworks, if you would, not one size fits all, but rather adaptable frameworks to reflect the risks posed by these technologies to its surrounding communities and the like. We took on an effort also we're taking on an effort to develop a generic environmental impact statement. This is intended to resolve issues in terms of impact to the environment generically as early as possible to streamline that part of the review. Again, another efficiency measure if we can get there. Some of the other activities also are involved in looking at siting and seeing what can be done in there to be able to facilitate siting and leveraging the lower risk offered by some of the technology and enhanced safety features. We're looking at fee structures as well. Fusion technology is another area that's gaining notoriety and gaining some dialogue and focus. So we're working to develop a regulatory framework for that. And we're also recognizing that with the diversity of the technologies, particularly on the size of it, oversight program should also match that. And that's an area that we're taking some efforts in as well. Next slide, please. Just pausing for a second on Part 53. I mentioned it once or twice, but I just wanted here to put on a slide for you some attributes in it. So it is our next step, if you would, in risk informing our regulatory frameworks. What we currently have, regulatory frameworks were developed over deterministic requirements, specific accidents that need to be looked at, specific criteria that need to be met. we're developing Part 53 to offer flexibility, coupled and balanced with appropriate predictability. As a regulator, we ought to be predictable. We ought to be clear on what needs to be met, such that an applicant can meet the appropriate criteria, and such that we can assure the safety of design. So this rulemaking is intended to provide such a framework, one that balances flexibility and predictability. We're also within that framework, we're offering ways to leverage additional design margin, safety margin built into design to enable operational flexibilities, meaning different licensing requirements for operators, different security requirements, as I indicated, and emergency preparedness requirements if that's appropriate and adequately demonstrated. Next slide, please. This is a slide that we use often, is intended to give you a vision of what the number of entities and that are interacting with us in some form or another, more formal than others, more with more concrete activities than others, but nonetheless, a number of entities are interacting with us. And this also gives you hopefully a purview of the different technologies that we're seeing in terms of cooling, and the different technologies we're seeing in terms of fuel, the sizes of the reactors that span the gamut, if you would, the inclusion or the interest in research and test reactors that are being looked at to demonstrate some of the safety, the new safety features offered in these activities. So significant amount of interaction, significant amount of interest. And perhaps one of the key points I want to make on this slide is there is a reason we went to the technology inclusive regulatory framework and the risk informed one, is because it is needed for such a diverse set of technologies as well. The Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program was highlighted a little earlier. On the slide, you'll see two purple boxes that represents the two vendors that are interacting with us, and we are in pre-application activities. And just as everyone else indicated, we are very laser focused on addressing issues with these technologies or these two vendors and moving forward with their reviews as soon as we can. Next slide, please. To hone in on the question for our session, which is it safe? I indicated earlier, and I gotta reiterate that one more time. We are not promotional. We would not be sitting here and say these are great technologies versus not. It is our job actually to assess whether or not they are safe, and we take that job very seriously. I put on the slide here, but a few areas just to give you the scope or a perspective of the scope and the diversity of elements that we look at. We look at severe accident issues. We look at fuel. We look at engineering in materials, mechanicals. We look at the type of hazards. Bruce pointed to some of that in his presentation. We look at instrumentation controls, ability to shut down the reactors, so on and so forth. So we if I wanted to convey anything on this slide, is to just share with you that we do a thorough review of these activities. Of these applications, these design. But I want to balance that with, we are also risk informed and safety focused. We try to focus on the areas and that matter to the safety of these designs, and avoid looking at areas that don't particularly have a significant impact on how these designs behave. Next slide, please. Just a little bit further insight, if you would, into is it safe? I mentioned we look at accident scenarios. This is just a chart, and I'm not going to get too wonky here and get too far into the chart. Just a chart to indicate to you that we truly look into significant number of accident sequence, everything that's possible. You look on the vertical side, that is actually the what we call the return period or the frequency of such accidents, and on the x-axis that represents the consequences or potential dose. The dark blue line is actually the regulatory limits for doses, and the different dots represents these scenarios. So just in a simple way, the furthest away a dot which is a scenario, a particular accent for a reactor. The farthest away that from the blue line is essentially design margin that's inherent there. So this is what we look into. We see how safe is the design, how much margin is built in there. And then as you can see here, the different regions on the graph represents that we look deep into very low frequency of events in the 1 in a million potentially. Next slide, please. In addition to safety and security, I'll quickly say that we also look at environmental impacts of the design on the surrounding area, the ecosystems, land use, water use, and alike. So I'll just move quickly through that, and just to mention it, that this is another area that we have significant focus on to make sure that that facility is safely sited within the area, within the community that it will reside. Next slide, please. I just have a couple of slides to quickly say that proven safe advanced reactors / micro reactors can offer tremendous opportunities. They have potentially great opportunities in safety improvements, lower risk, lower source term, increased safety margins, simplified designs, passive features, as Bruce indicated. And on the operational side, I did mention a few already: security, scalable emergency preparedness. You can see, less in these areas compared to current reactors. Longer fuel cycle that was discussed earlier today as well. So that offers opportunities on both sides, and from a regulatory perspective as well as economical perspectives as well. So tremendous opportunities here. Again, proven safe. Next slide, please. That doesn't come, without its own challenges. They're new. These are new technologies using new materials, new fuel. So there'll be work that needs to be done to prove the safety of these different materials, different the different fuels, the way in which they're being fabricated, and alike. So we'll be looking forward to look at these areas, get the information we need from vendors, and just assess the safety of these designs. The next slide is my next slide, and it really articulates a particular thought that I wanted to share with everyone, that we transact our business in an open and a transparent manner. We have so many opportunities for the public to participate, to voice their views, to share their concerns, and we take them very seriously, and we respond appropriately to them. So anything we're going to do that will impact your community, you will have the ability to participate, voice your view, and share your thoughts and concerns with us. With that, I'll stop here and be glad to take your questions and comments.
Very good. Thank you very much, Mo. That was quick but comprehensive. So there are a number of questions in the chat. Let's go ahead and move into the Q&A. Before we start going through the questions that you've put forward in the chat, I'd like to ask just a couple of questions myself. So really the most common use case discussed currently in Alaska is for the micro reactors. And I don't want to say that some of the promotion for these machines is too good to be true, but it sounds awfully appealing when you hear things like walk-away safety and the emergency planning zone ends at the front door. But from a very practical perspective, what can really happen to these things if they're at a remote location? What are the kind of scenarios that we have to concern ourselves with, and kind of what are the consequences that can occur? How far does inherent and passive safety go? I throw that open to either of you.
I guess I'd defer to Mo for the first part about the NRC's consideration of what is an appropriate emergency planning zone and site boundary, and that's based upon what a potential dose would be to the public.
So yeah, absolutely. Let me take it out of there. So Lou, appreciate the question. passive safety, enhanced safeties are real. Those are real characteristics and attributes of designs. They can be attained, they can be achieved. Many of the designers are bringing such thoughts, incredible innovations and ideas on passive cooling, no need for power, no need for human action to introduce. So we're more than open to assess these features and be able to leverage them and be able to rely on them in regulating these activities. So yeah, absolutely, there is all sorts of opportunities in that regard. In terms of could that actually result in a scale down emergency preparedness zones and the like? It could, and we are looking to develop an agile and scalable emergency preparedness regulations to recognize that, to actually assess, going thoroughly through potential accidents and potential malfunctions, whether it's human errors, whether it's equipment malfunctions, and from there we assess appropriate dose, and with the right dose proven, it could certainly very well be the site boundary for a site or a reactor.
One thing I would add about that is that, are these things real or not? I mean, there have been tests that have been done in the past. I mean, even back with the EBR 1 and 2, where they've tested that. Can you have a walk-away safe shutdown of the plant, a safe shutdown? So those things have been demonstrated. It's not just something that is a new technology that's never been looked at before.
Okay. One of the things that got attention in the chat was mentioned a few times during this panel and also during the earlier presentations, and that's the TRISO fuel. So much seems to be made of this. I won't say new fuel technology, but the fuel technology that's being focused on for utilization in many of the advanced technology reactors, including the microreactors. Bruce talked about how the fuel encapsulated the fission products. Is there a concern not only from escape of fission products, but also from just radiation release from the fuel? Is there a longer term concern with the storage and ultimate disposal of the fuel? Thinking in terms of the overall safety of the TRISO fuel, if you could shed any additional information on the safety aspects of using it?
Well, there's two aspects of the containment of TRISO fuel. One is that it contains the uranium and the fission products to very, very high temperatures that again would be higher than you would see in a reactor. There are beta and gamma that can pass through that wall, but that is the type of radiation that is that you typically design the plant for shielding and personnel protection around the plant. So it's that is where that type of exposure would take place, is more of within the plant, and that's how you would design the system. And I guess I would add from the long-term management of the TRISO as a spent fuel. Appreciated the comment that I think maybe Christine made this morning, is this is a fuel that is going to be around, and it's a potential that we could recover some of this fuel and reprocess it. So we think about it as spent fuel, not as waste. And as it is stored in the long term, in the locations, whether they store it at like the facilities they have in the United States right now for storing spent fuel, or if there's a consolidated storage facility that's developed by DOE in the future. The fact that these TRISO particles are very robust and resistant to release, then that also makes it a safer fuel for long-term storage.
I'll add to Bruce's point also that I'm aware that DOE, Department of Energy, has done significant testing on TRISO fuel, as Bruce indicated. we're looking from a regulatory perspective as to the available data, to what degree it can support our ability to license it. We're actually interacted with our colleagues in Canada on such a project, also to be able to share information on both sides and potentially be able to develop a joint regulatory positions on the ability for us to qualify, the transfer fuel. And that's intended to offer efficiency. If a vendor can get both regulators to agree and both regulators to be able to provide the joint position on that, that's saving and a streamlining of potential reviews on both sides of the border.
Very good, thank you. Related to that, a number of the micro reactor vendors talk about, and it was discussed a little bit in the first session, almost complete prefabrication at the factory, so to speak, and delivery and installation on site. And then once the fuel cycle is complete, 10, 15, 20 years, whatever it might be, to actually pick it up and remove it and bring in a new one. So what considerations have been made regarding the safety of transport of the fuel before and after it's been used in one of these microreactors?
I can take that question, Bruce. I can start with that. So a couple of things to mention here. I'll probably get a little bit into licensing and then beyond. So I mentioned Part 53 and what we're developing there for the new breed of reactors, if you would. One of the things that we're doing in there, we're making sure that we have provisions for what we call manufacturing licenses, and we see that supporting the opportunity to build a reactor and fuel it in a factory all the way through. Not particularly turning critical, because that trips up other requirements and needed licensing, but at least it gets to the place where it's actually ready to be turn critical, if you would, and then it would be shipped to the site. In terms of transportation safety, we've been looking up and down our regulations on transportation safety. We have been transporting fresh fuel and spent fuel for decades safely, interacting with the Department of Transportation, others, and it would be no different. We would carry on. Our regulations are effective in that regard. They have the kinds of testing needed to demonstrate the safety of such packages, and we would continue to look for ways to enhance or provide guidance. But outside of that, there is a regulatory framework in place that can actually effectively address the transportation of microreactor. They're essentially going to be a similar to a package that's carrying forward either fresh fuel or spent fuel. Bruce?
Yeah, what I would add to that is that that process, they're going through that process right now. I think Alice mentioned earlier that the Pele project up at Idaho National Laboratory, the Army is looking at a mobile nuclear power plant, and that unit would be considered a package and would have to be to meet those safety requirements for transport, and they're working with NRC on what that package certification would look like. So that's something that's going on right now. I expect that some of the other designs would go through that same process, that they would look at their reactor as a package that would be transported, and that reactor package would have to meet certain certification requirements.
Very good, thank you. There are a number of questions about something that you talked about a little bit, Mo, which was a generic environmental impact statement that might be applicable to advanced reactor technologies. Mm-hmm. Do you think there might be factors here in Alaska? We already talked about some of them in Bruce's presentation, where the cold, dark, temperature inversions might make the atmospheric dispersion models need to be modified. But are there conditions and things in Alaska that are going to need to be modified, even for a generic environmental impact statement?
Great questions. I'm hoping not. I'm hoping the areas that we've identified as generically resolved are truly generically resolved for the United States. The area that Bruce was talking about was more related to softwares that we've developed, particularly based on information from the 48 states, and don't particularly take some of the unique features that are offered in Alaska. Having said that, there's always a possibility we may come across something that is not particularly suited or aligned with what we've assumed when we've developed our generic environmental impact statement. I see that to be rare. I see that to be limited, and I think that particular environmental impact statement, if approved by the commission, would definitely benefit sites and facilities in Alaska.
Yeah, I would add to that the way that impact statement is constructed is, in the cases where they could, the NRC made generic findings. For instance, land use. Is there a potential? Is there a generic finding you can make that a nuclear power plant could be cited consistent with land uses? Well, that land use is different in Alaska, but still you would find a site that is consistent with local local land use restrictions and interests. So I think that there would of course be some outliers, things that are unique to Alaska that you may not be able to find a generic conclusion about, but a lot of the generic conclusions I think would be applicable. The one thing I was going to mention about the comment about climate change, I believe the way climate change is addressed in the EISs I've been involved with, and also I think in the generic EIS, is that climate change is viewed as a potential change in baseline conditions. For instance, today there may be a watershed that looks like what it looks like today, and then you would think about what would the impact of that power plant be on that watershed. With climate change, you may think about in the future, there may be changes to that watershed. The impact statement would say, okay, in the future, then what would be the impact to considering that watershed has changed? So it's a way to look at how the baseline changes over time and how the impact changes with a new situation in each one of these resource areas. I think that's the way it's addressed.
Bruce, you sound like somebody who's actually had to do environmental impact statements.
Yeah.
No small task, as anybody who's been engaged in them can tell you. So if somebody wanted to understand more about the process of the development of the generic environmental impact statements, or how to get engaged, how would we do that? Is there, maybe this is something that could be followed up after the panel, linked to some site or something?
I did put a link in. I thought I put a link into the chat here that was a link to the where the advanced reactor GEIS can be found. It's the NRC/reactors/new reactors/advanced details HTML. That is one of the NRC web pages where it has some information about the advanced reactor GEIS, the schedule, and I think it has a link to where you can actually find the draft versions.
Very good, thanks. So we've got some questions in the chat that I think are really the kind of questions that we have to engage on. I would call them the real questions that people ask, and we have to think about when discussing the safety of these advanced reactor technologies. So again, I'll paraphrase, and I hope I don't butcher it up too badly. So there's still a lot of research and development churn, I'll say, with these new reactors. And I think the gist of the question is it a little premature to bring this discussion forward to a public policy level, or is a little more work needed before we start talking to community policymakers and talking about specific sites and really moving forward with concrete plans until we see a little more results?
It's a great question. I can start with that. I think it is fair to ask the question. Do we have enough to move forward? And the answer to that is we will move forward as much as the information available to us allow us to do so. There's a ton of work. Bruce talked about TRISO, decades of work on that. Material work, graphite, and alike, decades of work on that. There are other areas that are new, and that's why we have research and test reactors, and we have facilities that test these different features. We do have regulations that require, before we license any reactor, to demonstrate any new safety features of these reactors, either through testing, through analyses, through combination of operating reactors. There's international experience that we bring to bear as well. There's experience in the United States of some of these reactors that we've licensed in the 80s and the 90s as well. So the question is valid. The question is clearly thoughtful. And I would say the answer is we would only go as far as the information available to us would allow us to, and we feel comfortable about it and being able to declare it safe.
I guess I would add that there was a discussion earlier about the National Reactor Innovation Center at Idaho. And that is a place where a vendor can come in and demonstrate a prototype of his reactor. And part of I think the reason for that facility is to help a vendor get through that point where he's got a design to a place where it's a commercially viable plant, to get through that valley where they have to get out and demonstrate something. And so I don't think it's just economics, though. I think it's that's an opportunity to demonstrate what you're talking about, that these plants have a safety, have an aspect, a passive safety, an inherent safety aspect, advanced systems that can be demonstrated through that process that they are safe. And so I would think that would be one effort that would go towards this this concern that these things are too far out now to really be considered as part of public policy. The other thing I would note is that, as Mo mentioned, they're considering these issues. The NRC has a process. If there's some new aspect that comes up, a vendor will submit a topical report that addresses that specific piece, and NRC will consider that in the topical report and make a decision on, is that an acceptable system? Is that a safe system? Should that be implemented in the design? And plants like NuScale and others have come in with topical reports that address really specific issues. So that process would be another way to address the concern that are these too far out? That's the way that they would review new aspects of these plans.
Very good. So just turning back to things that make Alaska different. There is a question and discussion in the chat about other aspects of Alaska that might make it unique with respect to regulation and licensing. For example, there's a broad reliance on harvested food in Alaska, wildlife and fish. And again, thinking about whether or not a generic approach would be suitable. Can we really, what are the other unique things that we're going to have to think about up here? I know that might not be the best question for the two of you to answer, but just given your experience in regulation and thinking about these advanced technologies, what should we be thinking about?
Well, I could take a first shot at that. I had a slide up that showed the different codes that the NRC uses to assess dose. So those codes are used to assess dose to the human populations, to workers, to the environment, and also to biota. So are there unique aspects of biota in Alaska? Absolutely. Those codes would have to be reviewed to know whether you can use those codes to think about how a release from a plant would be dispersed in the environment, how it would collect in the environment, how it could be what kind of uptake there would be through, through food sources for animals in the environment, how that would be then turned into a food chain that might come back to humans. So we have codes that can do that. I think that part of the task would be just to make sure that they are suitable and they would accurately capture the way that could happen in Alaska.
I would echo what Bruce indicated. I think in a way that I presented the generic environmental impact statement as a great vehicle to resolve issues generically, but I don't want to oversell it and say that we don't look at site-specific issues very closely. So that will be done. You know, there are things that will be unique to Alaska, and it will be looked at specifically. Some of the aspects as construction noise or things of that nature, those could be done particularly generically, but there are other aspects, you know, wildlife impact on, marine life around or what have you, that would have to be looked at site specifically. So certainly that will be looked at thoroughly and addressed. Also, our regulations are applicable to nuclear plants that are in warm climate, hot climate, agriculture areas, and alike. So these areas or models of hopefully similar to what was done in what would be done in Alaska do exist, and we would learn from it, and we would be able to focus on the appropriate aspects for an Alaskan site.
Yeah, I would second that comment about the advanced reactor GEIS. That is a tool that could be used by NRC. They would be able to apply those generic findings if they're appropriate, but if they're not appropriate, they would have to do a site-specific assessment. You know, it's not like you're going to just rubber stamp and say any reactor anywhere is good to go. That's not the way it works. That's a tool that NRC can use to do an environmental impact assessment.
So I'm gonna dive a little deep. There are some very specific questions. And this one is, I think, something that is it's important to consider. If you go to a typical gigawatt-sized reactor, you'll see double fences, armed security guards. Nobody gets in who isn't supposed to get in. But we're talking about a very different deployment here. So for a micro reactor that might be in a remote location in a village or at a mine, where's the protection from potential terrorist attacks? How do you implement security at a facility like that?
I can take a shot at that. So just like we've been discussing environmental impacts and making sure that will appropriately address security is in the same realm for us. We look at security very intently. The design basis threat is applicable to a microreactor just as much as it is applicable to a large light water reactor as well. What we're trying to do is the current framework has a specific set of requirements that is not quite as sensitive to the size of the reactor, the risk that it provides, the inherent safety that's built into that particular design. We're trying to reflect that into the design. So you may not need the same number of armed guards. You may not need the same number of fences because, again, the consequences of that facility are not that significant. You know, to the community around. Local law enforcement would be sufficient. Deterrence through instruments, devices, things like this, barriers, built in the design itself, inherent to the design itself. You can do all sorts of terrorist activities to it. You're still not going to get to where the fuel is or where the material is. So these are the things that we would reflect on, assess effectively, and then see that the appropriate security apparatus around such a design.
Yeah, I would say agree that the design, the process of doing that assessment is the same regardless of whether it's a 2,000 megawatt reactor or a 2 megawatt reactor. They would go through and figure out what the threats are, what the potential is for a release, and consider whether the security posture is appropriate for that situation. So the process would be the same. What you may end up with is quite a bit smaller because the threat is smaller and there's less of a potential.
Very good, thanks. I've got a follow-up question on transportation. And by the way, Gwen gave me the heads up. She said go ahead and proceed with the Q&A until 11:50 or till 52 minutes after the hour. And so I'm going to go a little bit longer because we got lots of questions. So just to follow up the transportation, it mentions that in Alaska, the road system's different. Maybe even unique. We don't have roads to a lot of places, and where we do have roads, they're not exactly interstate highways. And so, how would that have to be taken into consideration for movement of fuel, unirradiated, and irradiated?
Great question. So, the NRC certifies, if you would, the packages in which fresh fuel or irradiated fuel is transported, and there are rigorous testing that needs to be done for the NRC to certify such packages, including drop testing, pressure retaining, and alike. So we would rely on these tests. If we feel that additional tests are needed given road conditions, we would require such testing. We've been, again, successful in our certification and regulation of these, these containers and these casks for quite some time. And we would just look for if there is any need to that. But these tests and these experiments are quite conservative. They build sufficient margin for potential drops of these containers, for potential accidents involving such containers as well. So we would look very closely to make sure that we are enveloping it, if you would, the conditions in Alaska. But I'm confident that we are and we will if we need to.
Yeah, the one thing I would add is that there are a lot of the remote communities that aren't even served by roads. So they would have to fly a reactor in. They would have to maybe bring it in by barge or by ship. And so these transport casks that Mo was referring to, I mean, when they look at the potential for an accident, they look at all these different transportation modes. Of course, flying it is a whole different deal. They're thinking about those aspects as they're looking at the Pele project for the Army reactor at INL. And there's a lot of issues associated with that. Does what type of package would you have to design to be able to withstand an aircraft crash? Which tells me that most of the vendors would choose to either ship it by boat or by truck if available. But those are the design of that package is really meant to withstand the expected conditions of the roads that you're going to be transporting on. And so that's something that would have to be looked at. Can you do that? I mean, is a road to a very remote location sufficient for transporting that type of a package? That would have to be considered.
Bruce, I want to also just add, Lou, one last item, if you would. I don't want to leave the impression that we don't deal with air transport. We actually deal with that. And these casks do go rigorous testing to be qualified to be flown. And we do fly actually special nuclear material internationally to get medical isotope and alike. So I want to put people at ease that this would not be we would definitely look at any new nuanced conditions in there, but it's not particularly novel for us and the Department of Transportation, FAA, to be dealing with such conditions.
Very good. So there are a number of really broad, thoughtful, and far-reaching questions in the chat, and I would like to take the next 3 hours and go through them, but I'm afraid we're not going to be able to go through them. So I apologize to the people who have framed up these great questions. Gwen, I hope there's a way to capture them because they're very thoughtful, and I think many of them each have enough in them to take a whole hour to discuss. But for the moment, let's just wrap up. So Bruce, if you'd like to go first, any final thoughts?
Well, at the end of my presentation, I noted that, this would have to be a decision each community would have to make. regardless of how you feel about safety or not. Every community is unique and they have to make their own decisions. I would also note, just to your last point there, that as a workshop building up to a meeting in May, I mean, these are great questions, and they would, I think, help inform not just presentations we gave, but responses to these questions would help inform that meeting in May.
Very good, thanks. Mo, you have the last word.
Thank you. I don't deserve that. I don't deserve that privilege, but all I would say is I definitely appreciate the opportunity. If I want to leave you with one message, that we take our job very seriously. We absolutely want to work every day to make sure that this technology is safe. We don't promote it. If you choose not to use nuclear, it would not hurt our feelings. But what it would hurt our feelings is if it's not safe, and we would not let that happen. We will absolutely take every step to make sure that these technologies are safe, secure, and environmentally responsible. And you get to choose it if you want to choose it in your community.
Very good. Well, gentlemen, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure and a great privilege to have you with us as the real experts when we talk about this subject. And Gwen, I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Lou, and thank you so much, Mo. I have to say that you're one of I just know how busy you are, and so again, I really appreciate your time. And Bruce, you are one of my favorite people. You're kind of my go-to person when I have questions, and I appreciate you being willing to answer my calls over the last several years whenever I have those questions. So thank you. And Lou, just to answer your question, we are going to be saving all of the questions in the chat here and kind of trying to organize those and try to get as many of those answered, even if it doesn't happen as part of this workshop. So thank you, Lou, for doing a fantastic job moderating. And so we'll be coming together again tomorrow, 8:30 a.m. Alaska time, 12:30 p.m. East Coast time tomorrow, and we're going to start out with a panel on economics that's going to be moderated by Christy Bell with the Business Enterprise Institute at the University of Alaska Anchorage. We've got a couple of really great speakers that I'm excited to hear from lined up there. Mark Nichols with the Nuclear Energy Institute, sort of representing the industry perspective, and then John Parsons with MIT, who's been doing some really good work looking at Alaska case studies. Our last panel then will be on a question about whether it's environmentally and socially reasonable technology to be considering for Alaska in general, and not just our rural communities. There's been a lot of emphasis on that here, but I really want to make sure that we're expanding that to think pretty holistically about the state's future energy needs and what opportunities sort of exist here in the future. And that panel is going to be moderated by David Lockard with the Alaska Energy Authority. We're going to wrap up with a half hour, just really quick kind of summary of everything that we've learned. And that's kind of where I hope to pull some of those questions back in and sort of figure out which ones we really haven't answered. I really want to kind of, like I said, develop a bit of a pathway for the state in getting some of those answers to some of these tough questions. But I feel like we've made some real progress here today. I feel like I've learned some new things. I'm sure everybody here has. Really fantastic group of speakers. And so I'm excited about tomorrow. I hope that you guys are able to join us again. And I think that's it for today. So we'll talk to everyone tomorrow. Have a good afternoon.